Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. The sound of hurried footsteps reached his ears, making Mathis Rowan look up from the latest raven he got from Highgarden. There was nothing new in the raven except urging him to abandon fields and small folk under his protection and march to Highgarden with due haste. As if I'm gonna obey that stupid order, Mathis thought with a scoff. He was no coward to run away from the battlefield like the fat flower of Highgarden. He was a Rowan, and that name means something in the Reach. His family was born from the seed of Garth Greenhand. For thousands of years, his ancestors had fought and bled for the Gardener Kings to establish the borders of the Reach. His family had a long history of keeping the Kings of the Rock in check at the borders of the Reach. Many lions had thought themselves to set their greedy paws on the Gardener lands, but House Rowan was there to give a proper beating to the lions. "My lord," Sir Rickard Rowan rushed into his solar unceremoniously. He would have chastised if it was anyone else, but Sir Rickard was his kin, however distant the relation might be. "Sir Rickard, you have something for me." "My lord, it's the Lannisters. They've crossed the border. Our border patrols were attacked, and the survivors are just streaming in." "Calm down, sir. We knew they'd try something like this sooner or later." Mathis admonished his knightly kin for losing composure. Did any of the men notice where the Lannister forces came from? "The Lannisters. They were east of the river, my lord." Mathis growled in frustration upon hearing that. "That's no good, sir. I want to know whether they rode down from Silver Hill or crossed the ocean road and rode along the Red Lake to reach us," said Mathis. "We don't know, my lord. The men say they saw lion banners and the banners of 3 dogs in the field. Entire villages along the border were burned to the ground. It was a slaughter." "3 dogs?" Mathis frowned in thought. "Aye, my lord. 3 dogs and a yellow field. 'Tis the banner of House Clegane," said Maester Orm, walking into his solar. "A raven just came from Cold Moat, my lord. Lord Weber claims there is an army of Westerlanders 2,000 strong riding down from Silver Hill. Possibly more." "Send a raven back to Lord Weber. Order him to stand down and hold Cold Moat at all costs until reinforcements arrive." "You plan to ride out, my lord?" Sir Rickard asked, his boyish face creasing with worry. "Aye, but not alone, Meister. Send a raven to Old Oak. Tell Lord Oakart that the Lannisters have ridden from Silver Hill and begun their assault. Ask him to spare any reinforcements if he can," said Mathis. "My lord, there is a strong chance this could be a distraction." "What if Lord Tywin's true aim is Old Oak?" asked Maester Orm. "With the ocean road in his control, Lord Tywin could even threaten Old Town." "That's true, but I don't think the Old Lion is aiming at Old Oak. Nonetheless, dispatch riders and ravens to Highgarden, Bitterbridge, Cider Hall, Long Table, Brightwater Keep, and Old Town." "What'll you be doing, my lord?" Sir Rickard asked. "I'll be routing those Westerlanders from my land. Prepare the horses, Sir Rickard. I'll not suffer any Western lions in my lands." Mathis rode out from Golden Grove with more than half of his mounted forces. The raven from Highgarden warning him to shore up the defenses had worked to his advantage, but he was still not prepared to arm all his men with steel in their hands. Therefore, he focused on his mounted forces. He had very little foot with him, and not surprisingly, they were lagging behind his mounted forces. Instead of going straight to Cold Moat, he took a slight detour by traveling further west. There was a reason he chose to ride farther away from the seat of House Weber. Cold Moat was a strong castle surrounded by sturdy walls and a moat. The Lannisters, no matter their numbers, were not going to easily defeat the defenses of Cold Moat. Therefore, he suspected the lions were targeting Stanfast, the seat of House Osgrey. There was another reason he suspected the Lannisters were not sieging Cold Moat. While he did not doubt the loyalty of House Weber, he also did not forget Lord Tywin's grandmother was Rohan Weber. If his memory served him right, Lord Tywin spent some of his formative years in Cold Moat and had cultivated strong relations with House Weber. He wouldn't put it past the Old Lion to know the weaknesses of Cold Moat. After bunking down a few miles from Stanfast, he sent out scouts to scout ahead and see whether his hunch was correct. A few minutes later, the scouts returned, and with them came the confirmation of his worst fears. The Lannisters were merely making the ruckus at Cold Moat as a distraction while the real fight was at Stanfast. "I should not have asked the Webers to retreat into their castle. Mathis muttered after mounting his horse once more and leading his men against the Lannister forces attacking Stanfast. He shook his head and focused on the battle ahead. The scouts tell us Lord Osmond Osgrey has his back against Stanfast and steadily retreating to the castle. If we can circle around the hill ahead, we can take the Lannisters by surprise. Sir Rickard suggested.
No.
There is a small stream ahead that connects to the moat of Cold Moat. It'll slow us down too much if we cross the stream. Mathis disagreed. Lord Osgrey can hold off the assault for a time, can he not, my lord? Maybe he can, or maybe he can't. I know Stanfast cannot properly defend itself, as it has no walls, said Mathis, but he also saw the wisdom in covering all grounds. The Lannisters surely must have a camp close by if they were launching a full-scale attack on Stanfast. Have a few of our men cross the stream and scout ahead for the Lannister camp, he ordered in the end. Some of his men split off from the main host to cross the stream while he led the bulk of his men towards Stanfast as fast as his horses could run. When they finally reached Stanfast, it was evening, and the sunlight was starting to dim. Blow the horns. Let House Osgrey know we are coming to their rescue, Mathis ordered. As the horns blew twice, he arranged his army. He pushed all the archers to the left flank under the command of one of his household knights. The horses on his right flank were under the command of Seri Karad, and Mathis took command of the center. When the horns finished sounding out their arrival, he gave the order for the charge. Halfway through their charge, Seri Karad split off from the main host and charged straight into the Lannister lines, giving the Osgrey men some much-needed breathing room. Mathis, on the other hand, moved the remaining me to reinforce the Osgreys. His archers rained arrows on the Lannister army while he led the charge, breaking the center of the Lannister army. He cut through Westerland soldiers, one after the other. Any peasant foolish enough to challenge him in the field was quickly sent into the stranger's grasp. Surrounded by some of the finest knights of the Reach, Mathis cut through the Lannister center, with his eye on the Lannister standard, fluttering in the wind, further ahead. Blood was everywhere, and his blade was shining with the red liquid, but he was only more resolute in ending this battle in his favor. Mathis swatted away a spear that came close to his shoulder with his shield and put his sword straight through the skull of the soldier's skull. Pulling it back, he was quickly engaged in a bout of steel with a knight on horseback. He parried the knight's sword and tried to bury his sword through the neck of the knight, but he missed it as his sword only grazed the knight's helmet. The knight didn't remain idle and tried to smack him down from the horse with his shield. It was by luck he managed to keep his hold on the reins of his horse and moved away from the knight's reach. Moving further away from the mystery knight, he went back to cutting down Lannister men on the ground. Slowly but surely, he could feel himself getting out of breath as the battle raged. I'm not as young as I'd like, Mathis thought with a bit of worry. Suddenly, horns blared from the Lannister side. At first, he was a little confused, but soon he realized the Lannister army was withdrawing.
They're breaking off! They're retreating! He heard someone shout in jubilation.
But the man was right. Mathis could see the Lannister soldiers were disengaging from the battle. He immediately turned his horse around and waded through the battlefield. Archers! Archers! He shouted as he finally managed to arrive behind the defensive lines. Taking command of a company of archers, he had them move forward and bleed the fleeing Lannister army as much as possible. My lord, should we not give chase? Sir Rickard asked. Sir Rickard was drenched in blood and atop a new horse. Mathis looked at the knight with an appreciative look for showing his mettle in the first serious battle the knight had fought. It seemed I was not wrong to give command of the cavalry to Sir Rickard, but he has much to learn, he thought. No, we have the higher ground, we'll hold our position, and increase the defenses of Stanfast. We'll make our move only when we know the number of our enemies and whom we are fighting. Shall I arrange for the scouts, my lord? Sir Rickard asked. Aye, that'd be best. We need to find the lion's lair as fast as possible. Still, Mathis was a little bit annoyed that he didn't find a large Lannister army as he expected. This one was perhaps 1,000 strong, but that was no great number for assaulting the borders of the Reach. In the following days, the Lannisters sent small token forces that served as a nuisance more than any threat to their position. Mathis was pretty baffled why the Lannisters were behaving so oddly, but on the third day, he found out the crafty old lion had planned for them. But by then, it was too late as the entire North March was cut off by the wily Lannisters trapping his army inside an unfavorable position. Jon Arryn rubbed his head as he sat inside the small council chambers all on his own, thinking about the dark future ahead of the Seven Kingdoms. The days ahead were not going to be easy, and he knew more than anyone else that this war would weaken the Baratheon dynasty. Losing the Lannisters as allies would spell doom for Robert's prospects of holding the Iron Throne. For now, the last Targaryens were unable to cross the narrow sea, but if this war wages on for too long, then it'd only take a few ambitious lords to ferry the Targaryen children to Westeros. When that happens, everything will fall apart. It was for this reason he had tried all he could to avert war. He had sent raven after raven to Robert and Lord Tywin, asking them to exercise caution instead of plunging the realm into war. But both men were adamant about settling his matter on the battlefield, spilling rivers of blood. Till now, he had not made any moves to call the banners of the Vale. But he'd soon have to follow, as many Reach Lords have declared for Robert. He was just waiting to see where Tywin Lannister would strike. At least he didn't have to worry about King's Landing. Stannis had sent his men from Dragonstone and took control of the city in Robert's name. Stannis' actions probably saved many lives, as Lannister men in the capital wouldn't have surrendered that easily without prompt action from the Prince of Dragonstone. But it gave no relief for him when he was confronted with the fact that there was no way to safely dispose of the wildfire caches that were unearthed from around the city. All of those wildfire pots were buried outside the city, far away from any settlements. It was a risk to leave the wildfire pots anywhere, but without the alchemist, he didn't have men with the expertise to neutralize the substance. The Citadel had promised to dispatch some maesters to tackle the wildfire problem, but the war would undoubtedly create a hindrance to that plan. With no other option, Jon had resorted to assigning men to guard the site where the wildfire pots were buried. It was no ideal solution, but no other option was available in the current scenario. The door to the council chamber opened, and a familiar smell of perfume entered his nostrils. Lord Varys. Lord Hand, I've word from the Reach. Oh, you go on. Jon waved his hand invitingly. The Lannister army has poured through the Reach borders. They attacked the North March region, my lord. Jon let out a disappointed sigh and leaned back into his chair. And how is it looking, he asked. 'Tis not good, my lord. The lords of North March fought bravely, but they were outmaneuvered by Lord Tywin. Lord Tywin has trapped the bulk of forces from the houses Osgrey, Rowan, and Weber in North March by destroying the dam on Checkwe Water. As a result, the lands of Osgrey and Weber are flooded. I believe Lord Tywin has also commanded Lord Serret to break all dams and canals in Silverhill, thereby increasing the water flow in Lower Mander passing through North March. I believe we can expect the entire North March region to stay out of any fights with the Westerlands until they can mitigate the flood somehow. Jon could only gape at the Master of Whispers. But then he remembered Lord Tywin was intimately familiar with the lands of North March and the Reach, thanks to his blood ties with House Weber. If the North March is flooded, then the Lannisters are also unable to march on Highgarden. Unless, Jon trailed off as he realized what was being planned by the Old Lion. What about the Ocean Road? Has House Oakart called their banners? Asked Jon. Lord Tywin commands the army marching through the Ocean Road. Lord Hand, it'll take a week at least for Lord Lannister to reach Old Oak. Who was leading the attack on North March? Jon asked anxiously. It was Sir Tyget, Lannister, my lord. Lord Mathis Rowan defeated Sir Tyget's host at Stanfast, but it was only a distraction. Varys said, a tittering smile on his face that made Jon seriously consider throwing something at the bald spymaster's head. What about Robert? Jon instead asked. His Grace has marched the Stormlords to Ashford. The Tyrells are marshalling all their men at Highgarden, and Old Town is on high alert. The Tyrells are not reinforcing their northern lords, Jon asked with a thoughtful frown. They are not, my lord. Varys nodded. I suspect Mace Tyrell wishes to march with his grace. All things considered, that's not a bad idea, Jon thought. Has there been any word from Dorne? I'm afraid not, my lord. Perhaps we can expect a raven from Sunspear. Prince Doran is a cautious man. I doubt he'd do anything that benefit Lord Tywin for obvious reasons, said Varys with a simpering smile. Let's hope that's the case, Jon muttered under his breath as he knew how unpredictable Dornishmen could become. Nonetheless, he had sent out a raven to Sunspear, explaining the circumstances behind the current animosity between House Lannister and Baratheon. He worded it in such a way that they might get the chance to exact vengeance on House Lannister. A sudden knock on the door, and it was revealed to be his young squire. What is the matter? My lord, Lord Stannis Baratheon has arrived at the city gates. He is no mere lord. In the absence of any true-born children, his grace's heir is Prince Stannis Baratheon, the Prince of Dragonstone, said Varys. Jon eyed the spy master at the interruption, but he agreed with the spider's assessment. Invite Prince Stannis to the small council chambers, Jon ordered. By the time Stannis reached the small council chambers, the remaining members of the small council were in attendance. There was Petyr Baelish, Grandmaster, Pycelle, and Varys sitting in the council with him. But Stannis didn't come alone into the Daemon council chambers. Full-plated knights accompanied the Prince of Dragonstone into the council chambers. Prince Stannis? What is the meaning of this? Jon protested as the knights unsheathed their swords while they surrounded the small council. Sir Axel, take the Grandmaster into custody. Throw him into the black cells. Stannis commanded. What? My lord, what is this? I'm but a loyal servant of King Robert. Pycelle stuttered out protests as he was forced up by his grey robe by the Baratheon knights. Shut up, you old cretin. You serve no one except the old lion. This council does not need Tywin's chief spy in it. Stannis growled. The knights manhandled the old Meister out of the council chambers despite Jon's protests. What is the meaning of this, Stannis? You cannot just imprison the Grandmaster on a whim. Jon protested. I have not acted on whim, Lord Arryn. I've been authorized by His Grace to take command of the Crown Land forces and ensure the safety of his capital in his absence by any means necessary. Still, to act so brazenly against Grandmaster Pycelle. My Lord Hand, we must consider the possibility that the Grandmaster might have been the one to warn Lord Tywin of what transpired in Storm's End. I'd say Prince Stannis' actions are prudent considering the situation of the city. Varys jumped in unexpectedly, announcing his support for Stannis. I suppose it is necessary to be cautious, Jon said, looking unsure where this was going. Lord Arryn, have you called your banners? No. Then do so, my lord. I suspect the Riverlands would undoubtedly get embroiled in the war at some point. I shall focus on gathering the lords of the Crown Lands and guard the Gold Road against any Lannister aggression. I hope I can depend on the Knights of the Vale to defend the Riverlands. I suppose it cannot be helped. I'll send the Raven to the Vale Lords. Jon muttered, his shoulders slumping in defeat as he thought of all the young ones who would soon be robbed of their lives in this unnecessary war, just like his kin in the last war. What about the North? As I understand it, we are in this war thanks to Lord Stark's son. Baelish peeked up. Edard has called his banners. It takes time for the Northerners to gather, and I'm told they are in the midst of a harvest. It might take a while for the Northern army to cross the neck, said Jon. Are we not going to discuss the matter of Lord Stark's son, my lords? His Grace is waging this war on the premise that his magical hammer refuses to budge despite Prince Joffrey's efforts. Shouldn't we discuss the matter of magic deciding someone's ancestry before anything else? Said Varys. I concur with Lord Varys. How can we know for sure the magic in the hammer was not set in that specific way to deny access to Prince Joffrey? Are you accusing the Starks, Lord Baelish? Jon asked incredulously. No, my lord. But I find it odd that everyone is perfectly happy to let a hammer judge the ancestry of Prince Joffrey. If we are to fight a war against Queen Cersei's family and accuse her of cuckolding the king, I think it is reasonable to inquire for more proof. Perhaps the Citadel could investigate the matter more thoroughly. Baelish proposed. There is no need, Lord Baelish. Maester Crescent of Dragonstone has already supplied my brother with other evidence to prove Cersei Lannister's crime. The lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms, with descriptions of many high lords and noble ladies and their children, is a book written by Maester Mallion. It contains the traits of those possessing Baratheon blood. All Baratheons that followed Orys Baratheon had blue eyes and black hair. This trait never skipped the children in any marriages, including past marriages between a Baratheon and Lannister. If that's not proof enough, the appearance of Maya Stone, Edric Storm, as well as the many bastards sired by my brother the king are living proof. Jon looked at Petyr Baelish and Varys to see whether they had anything to say after that long-winded explanation from the king's brother. Both men were silent as a grave. If this council seeks the veracity of my claims, I'm sure a copy of the book is available in the library of the Red Keep. It was by using this book as evidence my brother, the king, declared the children Joffrey and Myrcella as bastards of Cersei Lannister. It is henceforth my brother's wish that Joffrey and Myrcella are henceforth be called Joffrey Waters and Myrcella Waters, said Stannis, taking a sealed parchment with the king's seal and handing it over to Jon Arryn. We are questioning the former queen's retinue and the Kingslayer to see whether we can find who fathered Cersei's bastards. Jon broke the seal and saw the declaration written by Robert and the royal seal at the bottom of the parchment. I shall make copies of the declaration and send it to all the major lords of the Seven Kingdoms, said Jon, letting out a sigh. He supposed there was no coming back from this act, now that Robert had officially voided the legitimacy of Joffrey and Myrcella. I suppose we ought to discuss the steps to secure the city. Please take your seat, Prince Stannis. This ought to be a long meeting. Jon said tiredly, thinking whether it was a better idea to retire after this war. Jon was just about ready to give up after trying his best to keep the city together after the wildfire fiasco and the devastation that wrecked the city after a series of unfortunate events. Perhaps he ought to have a talk with Robert to bring Northerners and Rivermen into the small council. Without Lannister support, Robert needed his natural allies more than ever to dissuade Targaryen loyalists from threatening the king's peace. Patrice Oakart looked at the burnt smoking remains of the farming village with a sense of dread and anger. The wanton destruction and barbarity shown by the Lannister army were beyond inhumane. The worst part was that he could not help but take some responsibility for the loss of life that was before his eyes. If I had only sent more men to escort the small folk away from the village a little early, hundreds would have lived. Patrice thought grimly, looking on with horror at the butchery the Lannisters unleashed. Do not blame yourself, my lord. You did everything you could in the situation, said Sir Alistair Redmayne. Patrice just shook his head and turned his horse away, not wanting to look upon the failure of his duty. Are there any survivors? He asked, once his sons, Gwayne and Desmond, returned to his side on their horses. None, father, Gwayne said grimly. Those monsters spared no one, not even children. Patrice could hear a slight inflection in his younger son's voice. It was only natural to feel so strongly, especially when his younger son had just had a newborn daughter before this blasted war came to their lands. The Lannisters didn't make it easy either, as most veteran soldiers and knights were horror-struck at the depravity and butchering the Western Ebb had wreaked on their lands. Perhaps there are survivors who escaped the slaughter. The survivors might have fled to the shores or deep into the woods, Desmond said, looking far worse compared to his younger brother. Patrice knew the reason. It was his eldest son who found the well full of dismembered bodies of the men of the village. The women were strewn across the village in barns and houses with their bodies violated. It was as if hell had come to these lands. He wondered whether this was the same fate that befell King's Landing a decade ago. Ride back to the camp and get some rest. You look like you've not slept for days, Desmond, said Patrice, knowing his eldest son had been chasing Grid or Clegane across the countryside. No, father, It's an order, Desmond. You'll return to Old Oak and take some rest. While you're there, you'll review the preparations of Old Oak for a long siege with Master Omer, he said sharply, leaving no room for discussion. You're dismissed. He watched his eldest son ride off after letting out a huff of protest. Father, your brother is too soft-hearted for this kind of battle. He is a good man, but out of the goodness of his heart, he has extended our men far out of the reach of our supply lines by chasing Clegane. Patrice snapped, making his younger son shut his mouth with an audible click. We are fighting this war to Lord Tywin's design. Thanks to your brother, the Old Lion wants to weaken the forces mustering at Old Oak, so he can overwhelm us there and take the Ocean Road. What are you saying, father? Gwayne asked tentatively. We retreat to our lines, we prioritize holding the Ocean Road and denying the Lannister army taking control of our castle. But there are 5 more villages we couldn't evacuate. If we retreat, we leave them to the tender mercies of House Lannister, Gwayne protested. We don't have the men to spare, and even if we did, I sense a trap is being set by the Lions. Patrice grimaced, giving the orders to retreat after burying the dead in the village. He knew he was sentencing the rest of the countryside to Lannister cruelty, but war seldom gives good choices. A few days later, refugees began streaming in with stories of murder, rape, and butchery. Word spread quickly among the men, and the clamor for taking the fight to the Lannisters only became stronger. But Patrice exercised caution and refused to give up the advantage by being goaded into a trap. His caution stemmed from the fact that the scouts he sent forth so far had not found the Lannister camp, which deprived them of knowing the disposition of the Lannister army. The Lords of Northmarch, getting bogged down by the flood, also played a crucial part in his decision to pull back his army and defend Old Oak rather than ride out to face the enemy in the field. Patrice sat alone in his tent, staring intently at the map sprawled out on his desk. He had marked all the villages the Lannister army had attacked in the past week and constructed a reasonable timeline. He was hoping he could find a place that'd facilitate the Lannisters to camp out and strike at these villages and withdraw in quick order. The flaps of his tent were suddenly thrown open as Sir Alistair Redmayne walked in with haste, holding a piece of parchment in his hand. "My lord, word from Old Oak has arrived. Lord Alistair Florent has sent a 5,000-strong army under his son's command to protect Old Oak and Ocean Road." Sir Alistair reported with a happy grin on his trusted captain of guard's face. Relief flooded Patrice's mind as he read through the message written by Maester Omer. "It seems we'll need to make preparations to accommodate Lord Alicant Florent in our camp," he muttered. "By your leave, I shall see to the preparations, my lord," Sir Alistair offered. He was about to nod, but a guard suddenly entered his tent unannounced. "Forgive me, my lord, sir. The scouts have returned, and they found the Lannister camp." His eyes widened as he realized the opportunity that was presenting itself. With additional troops to hold the Ocean Road on their way, and his scouts pinpointing the Lannister camp, he could push back the Lannister army. "Sir Alistair, have the scouts mark the positions on the map. I'll also need to know the strength of the enemy we are to face, and call forth my son." The preparations from there on out were fast-paced. The chances of the Lannister army relocating their camp were too much to ignore. He rightly feared the Lannister army was mustering a larger host, and if that was the case, he needed to deal a blow to the Lannister army and boost the morale of his men. He wondered what his youngest son was doing. Aerys was a competent knight, and he hoped his son was serving the king ably in the Kingsguard. At least I'll be meeting Aerys soon enough. Patrice thought. Sir Gwayne of Old Oak felt like he could kill 1,000 Lannisters and would feel not a thing after having witnessed the cruelty of the Lions of the West. He supposed he shouldn't have expected anything less from the family that butchered the wife and children of Prince Rhaegar. Still, there was something to be gained for the Lannisters in butchering the family of Prince Rhaegar. He could not see what benefit the Lannisters was hoping to achieve here by slaughtering defenseless small folk. If it was to piss him off and the men accompanying him, then the Lions had succeeded in their objective. "Sir, the archers are in position," Goran informed him, looking at him most eagerly with wide brown eyes for orders. Gwayne looked at the sky to see the light was slowly dimming. If they waited any longer, they'd be attacking the Lannister camp in low visibility. His father's orders were to attack the enemy camp at night, but he wanted these murderers to live and breathe in fear as he rained death down on them. "Kill the lookouts and have a contingent of horses ride in to draw out these Lannister scum. We'll bleed them dry in our soil," he ordered, earning a vicious smirk from Goran, who nodded his head and went about to communicate his order to the men. The archers began the initial assault by taking out the lookouts posted around the Lannister camp. The Lannister men became aware of their presence and began to gather, especially after a contingent of mounted knights loudly charged into the Lannister camp. The ruckus of the battle attracted more and more Lannister men to come out of their tents, and that was when he gave the signal for his troops to move in from the flanks. Archers led the attack from the forefront by raining fresh salvos of arrows on the unsuspecting Lannister men in the camp. Not everyone in the Lannister camp was armored, and that left the enemy suffering mortal wounds from his archers. Closely following his archers were the infantry troops that clashed with the hastily put-up defensive lines of the Lannister army. As the battle raged on in the camp, Gwayne held back the bulk of his forces, comprising of his horses, for the opportune moment to strike. The light from the sun dimmed further, and finally he saw the huge behemoth of a man that was Gregor Clegane take the field. "Tywin's attack dog. You'll meet your end here," Gwayne muttered as he mounted his horse and took a spear into his hand. "My fellow knights, today we put an end to killers of women and children. Today we shall introduce them to the steel of our swords. Today we'll bring them to the stranger." Gwayne raised his spear and let out a shout taken up by the men as they surged with bloodlust. Together they rode down from the shade of the trees into the camp. The clapping of the collective hooves of their horses was akin to rumbling thunder from the heavens. Gwayne could feel his heart hammering in his body as he held the spear at ready. "This is a righteous war. This is a righteous war. This is a righteous war. This is a righteous war." Gwayne kept muttering inside his helmet as he drew closer to the Lannister men. His horse slammed into a soldier who looked like he was just shitting his pants, while Gwayne stabbed his spear through the neck of an unsuspecting Lannister soldier. His spear broke in his hand, and he was forced to unsheath his sword after he regained some semblance of control over his horse. He trotted the horse forward and sliced through the back of the neck of a Lannister soldier. He hacked and slashed through the Lannister men, steadily gaining ground against the Mountain, who was swinging his massive sword like a battering ram. He saw an opportunity when the Mountain turned his back and began fighting 3 men. Urging his horse forward, Gwayne surged ahead, gaining speed. He raised his sword, eager to claim the glory of felling the Mountain, but Clegane turned at the last moment, and what happened next was not something he properly saw. He was flying away from his horse for some reason, and with a painful crash, he fell to the ground. He was breathing heavily, and there were black spots in his vision. It took him a moment to realize his eyes were getting clouded by blood pooling into them from his head. He quickly pulled his helmet away from his head and wiped the blood away. A bestial growl alerted him to the fact that he was in danger. Gwayne rolled forward on instinct, and that saved his life as a massive sword slammed into his previous position. Turning around, he saw the behemoth figure of Gregor Clegane marching toward him with a murderous look. He scrambled back in fear as the giant came towards him. Out of nowhere, his friend Goran came to his rescue, but he watched with horror as Goran fell flat on the ground from a single punch from Clegane. Then the giant man stomped with a bellow on Goran's head with all his might. Gwayne heard a sickening crack as his friend's head was crushed under the massive boot of the Mountain. Gwayne breathed hard as he became consumed by rage. With a mighty roar, he climbed to his feet, raising his sword to take the head of the monster standing before him. He threw a few quick jabs at Clegane, but the man was very good with his footwork, despite his massive size. Letting out a frustrated yell, he went for an overhead slash against Clegane's shoulder, but the Mountain was faster. He was forced to defend himself as Clegane surged forward with a speed that took him by surprise. The Mountain's massive greatsword came at him with a force and speed that made him freeze in indecision. And that indecision cost him as the greatsword struck his longsword with a force that made his sword bite into the chainmail on his shoulder. Ah! Gwayne screamed as he could feel sharp steel biting into his bones. Chafing under the pain, he saw the giant head of Gregor Clegane coming towards him in full force, and then he knew no more. Adam Marbrand was a man loyal to the Lannisters. All that he learned and all that he enjoyed was owed to Lord Tywin from the moment he served as a page in his younger years. His family had always enjoyed closer ties with the Lannisters of the Rock. Their loyalty was proven true when Lord Tywin called his banners to crush the Rhaen-Tarbeck rebellion. Ever since then, House Marbrand had enjoyed far closer ties with the Rock. That was not the only reason he was adamant about seeing the Lannisters win this war. Jaime was his childhood friend, and he'd see Lord Tywin's eldest son get released from captivity. "Sir, Adam, the men are ready," said Ser Flemont Brax. Adam nodded at the black-haired knight. He mounted his horse and slowly trotted forward, observing his 5,000-strong mounted cavalry. "Our orders from Lord Tywin are simple. We ride fast on our horses and take Bitterbridge in Lord Tywin's name. As you might have noticed, we won't be depending on our supplies to fight this war. We'll have to forage from the ripe fields of the Reach and their wealthy castles. Any riches that we take will be shared equally amongst the men. Our goal is Bitterbridge, and anything between us and our goal is the enemy." Sir Adam unsheathed his sword, raising it high in the air. "What do we do with our enemy?" he shouted at the top of his lungs. "We kill them all," the men shouted back, thrusting their swords high in the air. "What do we do with our enemy?" "We kill them all." "Good, because they'll be looking to kill you lot as well. So let's kill the fuckers first." Sir Adam turned his horse around and charged down the hill, parting away from the Gold Road and the main host as planned. The thundering of hooves boomed in his ears as his men followed his lead. The banners of golden lions fluttered in the wind as they rode down from the hills into the plains of the Reach. He threw his eyes further east, where he could see another large host of some 4,000 mounted men riding along the Gold Road. This second host was led by Sir Kevan Lannister and Lord Roland Craighall. Their goal was to take Tumbleton and then join him while they marched further west against Robert Baratheon's host. It was a bold plan. Lord Tywin's plan depended on their ability to quietly and quickly take Tumbleton and Bitterbridge, while Lord Tywin drew the Baratheon host into the Ocean Road. If the war was to end in favor of House Lannister, then Robert Baratheon was to be taken captive. With the Baratheon king their captive, they can negotiate with Lord Arryn and force Prince Joffrey's early ascension with the Regency Council, ruling till the prince attains his majority. He just hoped everything went according to plan, as the other kingdoms were slowly but surely mustering their armies. If the gods were in favor, then Juran Lannister's peace overture with House Tully would end up working in their favor. "So, what do you think?" Harry asked Marwyn, who was sporting glassy eyes while looking at the two dragons sitting in two corners of the room, minding their food bowls. For the ice dragon, he had given a bunch of pineapples, which the vegan dragon was all too happy to munch on heartily. "It's quite fascinating, my lord," Maester Marwyn mumbled, never taking his eyes off the fire dragon, which was gorging itself on a cooked piece of lamb. "I have never heard of a dragon with 4 limbs. I know ice dragons have 4 limbs. Perhaps using the ice dragon crystals has changed the fundamental nature of the fire dragon." Harry theorized, scrutinizing the fire dragon. Simply fascinating. Marwyn breathed out, slowly reaching his hand towards the fire dragon that was focused on the meat in the bowl. At the last moment, the fire dragon let out a displeased screech and breathed out a plume of fire toward Marwyn. Harry hastily put up a shield that kept the old Meister safe from dragon fire. "Well, that was close," Harry muttered, while Marwyn backpedaled after the hatchling's reaction. "I think he is just shy." Harry looked between the two dragons and sighed. Both dragons were not as friendly as he had hoped. He had thought the dragons would take a liking to him, since he was the one to hatch them. Maybe they'll just need time to adjust, Harry thought. He restored the wards in the room and left the dragons to spend their time in peace. He'd let the two dragons separated by the protective wards until they finished their meal before confining them to their respective dimensions in the magical trunk. A raven came from Winterfell. Lord Stark has issued orders declaring Lord Jorah Mormont to be a slaver. He is traveling from Winterfell to Bear Islands to take Mormont's head. Harry frowned. Without hearing his side, the accounts of the survivors we found must have been convincing. Lord Ricewell also found a few survivors. They also blamed Lord Mormont as the culprit who sold them to a slave ship from Essos. "I don't understand. What are slave ships of Essos doing here? Why are they so bold to come on this side of Westeros?" "I've received word from Hightower that the Ironborn are engaged in slave trade once again to stabilize their finances after the war," said Marwyn. "I see. So the Iron Islands are giving these slave ships port facilities in return for coin, and King Robert and the royal fleet is otherwise engaged." "I'm afraid so, my lord." Harry let out a grunt as he stared at the sea. Down below the shores of his castles, the works on ships and ports were going ahead despite the many hindrances coming his way. "Tell the men to speed up on their work with the ships. Before this month ends, I at least want 2 ships to my name," Harry ordered. "I shall convey your wishes to the workers, my lord." If there is something that needs my attention, I'll be with Elsera. I promise to teach her to charge the sun runes," said Harry, walking away, while Marwyn looked out towards the sea, where men were toiling away at the shipyard. Nothing was certain, but Avalon might just escape the demands of the war in the south. If it does, then there was a chance the shipyard might get finished in time. One could only hope in these trying times. The city was slumbering under the veil of darkness provided by the advent of night. There were distant rumbles in the sky, announcing the chance of a rainy night. Deep beneath the Red Keep, a man shrouded in darkness walked through the secret tunnels, with nary a footstep in the deafening silence of the night, except for the burning candle that was held in the man's hand. The man came to a halt as he reached a gate. He tapped it 3 times, the sound carrying into the dark tunnel ahead. The candlelight flickered as a gust of wind glided into the tunnel before abruptly cutting off. Another light flickered into being in the distance, and soon a set of footsteps echoed in the otherwise silent part of the Red Keep. The 2 candlelight drew ever closer in the darkness. Soon they were inside a chamber filled with smooth black bones of great creatures of power. Both men took stock of the giant, snarling visages of the Targaryen dragons of old. "Magnificent, aren't they?" asked Varys, throwing his hood back, marveling at the giant skulls that adorned the chamber. "Sure, but I implore you, my oldest friend, to dispense with the theatrics. It's in poor taste, given the situation," said Illyrio Mopatis, throwing his hood down the back of his neck and taking a deep breath. "Theatrics is a part of who I am. A good street juggler is a master of theatrics. You are hardly one nowadays," Illyrio pointed out, rubbing the stubble on his chin. You're the master of whispers serving in the small council of King Robert Baratheon, the first of his name. I do a different sort of juggling in the royal court, but juggling nonetheless. Besides, the city has been awfully dull lately. Some theatrics among friends is warranted in times like these. Varys tittered. A serene silence fell between the two old friends as they quietly enjoyed the relics of House Targaryen's power in a bygone era. The narrow sea is ripe with hearsay. The stag and the lion are at war. You did not fall prey to hearsay of fools and sailors. Varys swiftly finished, to Illyrio's displeasure. Why? Why would you let this happen? You know we were nowhere ready for a war, said Illyrio, setting his candle beneath the behemoth skull of a dragon. You assume I have a hold over the lords of Westeros to stop them from making stupid mistakes. You think too highly of my abilities, my friend. Varys shook his head. On the contrary, I know exactly what you are capable of, old friend. Illyrio scoffed. Come now, you are the greatest juggler of all. You managed to make Aerys dance and jump through hooves. Don't tell me you are unable to handle a measly stag. Avarice was half mad. I need only to leave enough breadcrumbs for the man to turn against his own flesh and blood. Robert Baratheon is not like that. Besides, it is already out of my hands. Cersei Lannister made the mistake of not keeping her bastard by her side. Favres sighed disappointedly, knowing that years of planning had gone to waste with a war this soon between the lions and stags. You know, I could have never foreseen the emergence of the Black Wolf, and through him the ever-soaring fortunes of House Stark and the North. I believe we must rethink our strategy if we are to pursue the restoration of the dragons on the Iron Throne. Varys said after a moment of silence. Illyrio looked into the vacant eyes of the dragon skull before him in deep thought. What are you thinking? Asked Varys. I think we need more allies than we previously thought. We need to tie the North to our cause. Varys raised an eyebrow at the suggestion. Your suggestion has merit, but words are wind. House Stark remains one of the staunchest supporters of House Baratheon. How exactly do you intend to shift their loyalty to our young Griff? Varys asked with a raised eyebrow. Not directly. We'll need to bring the Martells into the fold for my plan to work. The Martells? Varys looked incredulous at the very notion. Yes, Aegon must be revealed to them as soon as possible, said Illyrio, looking thoughtfully while rubbing his stubble. You do realize a secret remains a secret, only when fewer people are in the know. I'm not the only one to hold spies in Dorne. All it would take is a single mistake, and we'll lose our advantage. Varys warned, looking at his old friend in concern. Then we'll have to make sure there are no mistakes, Illyrio said firmly. Varys stared at his old friend for a long while, but the Pentosi Magister didn't change his mind. I suppose I can make certain arrangements to shield Sunspear from spies for Aegon's arrival. Varys said reluctantly. However, that still leaves the issue of binding House Stark to our plans. How exactly do you suppose the Starks can be enticed to support Aegon? Marriage. Aegon is most suitable to marry a Stark of Winterfell, is he not? I believe Lord Stark has a daughter who could become a good queen for Aegon, or a marriage between House Martell and Stark should do the deed. Varys scoffed loudly. You're so terribly misinformed of Westerosi matters, my friend. Lord Edard won't make any move that threatens his friend's position in the south, Varys said with a certainty that made Illyrio frown. Then Lord Stark shall be removed quietly. Who knows, the Lannisters might end up doing us a favor should the war claim the honorable Lord Stark. Varys opened his mouth to refute his friend, but he paused as the scenario laid out by Illyrio was plausible. If Lord Eddard met his end in this war, there was a slight possibility that the Starks could be brought into the fold. For sure, he was aware Lord Stark's early passing would mean a regency for young Robb Stark. He doubted the Northern Lords would accept the rule of a Southerner like Lady Catelyn at the helm of Winterfell. If his memory served him right, no woman had ever ruled Winterfell. Even if the Tullys put pressure on the Iron Throne for a regency under Lady Catelyn, he could see the Northern Lords taking matters into their own hands. The possibilities were endless, but too many unknown elements at work made the whole plot unattractive to him. On the other hand, the Starks were already well acquainted with Oberyn Martell. The Red Viper had lived with the Starks for a year and taught Haryon Stark in the training yard. I'll have to give this much thought, my friend. I cannot make such decisions on the spur of the moment. Varys eventually said, I'd say you should hurry in deciding Varys. We are not the only ones with dragon pieces on the board. There are strange rumblings from Myr surrounding the Beggar King. Viserys is a spiteful idiot with no sense of tact. Trust me, I'm keeping the 2 dragons under watch. Viserys waved away Illyrio's concern. I should hope so. Meanwhile, I shall make necessary arrangements to bring word to Connington. I think it's time the young Griff learns of his destiny. Varys just nodded, wiping away a stray sweat that built up right above his brow. They discussed several other matters, like the war in the Reach and the developments in Myr surrounding the last Targaryens, in some detail before cutting their conversation short just shy of the hour of the wolf. Varys retraced his footsteps along the secret passages beneath the Red Keep, with many thoughts swirling around in his head. He was aware that one wrong step would undo everything and jeopardize his position in court. To this day, he was able to keep his head thanks to King Robert. The Stag King was disinterested in ruling the kingdoms, and the king often tended to wield the power of the Iron Throne, sparingly. Lord Arryn was also a mild-mannered ruler ideally suited for peacetime, allowing him to function smoothly. But he was aware this was no longer peacetime, and Stannis Baratheon had amassed near absolute control of King's Landing. The younger brother of the king was a dangerous man, a just man, but also a dangerous one in Varys' eyes. There was nothing more terrible than a truly just man, Varys thought, shivering at the very thought of the cold, dispassionate, judging eyes of Stannis Baratheon. The capital was very dangerous for jugglers like him, and he knew Stannis was all the more dangerous, especially considering some of the whispers he was hearing from Dragonstone. He had never considered Stannis Baratheon a godly man, but Dragonstone was fast becoming a ripe ground for religious fanaticism. The only reason he had kept such whispers from reaching the ears of the small council was that he saw an opportunity to sow discord among the Baratheon brothers. If he played the long game, he could orchestrate a confrontation between the Baratheon dynasty and the faith of the Seven. It was a distant possibility, but one he was unwilling to discard so easily. When he finally reached his quarters, he was met with 2 of his little birds waiting in a dark corner. Come now, don't be shy. What new songs have you heard? Varys tittered behind his sleeve. The spry little informants of his passed him a roll of parchment before scurrying away quietly into the dark. Varys chuckled amusedly at their antics. Opening the scroll, he began reading the contents of the parchment, which wiped his smile right away, and, in its place, a thoughtful frown adorned his face. This does not look good for Robert Baratheon. Jon Arryn needs to be informed. Varys thought grimly. Jon Arryn was quite happy at the moment. He knew it wouldn't last for long, but he was fortunate enough to see Stannis Baratheon smile. He silently conveyed his thanks to the Seven, knowing that the news brought forward by Ser Davos Seaworth was not just a cause for celebration for Stannis, but for the whole realm. Please accept my heartfelt compliments. My prince, a son of yours, by Lady Selyse, in these trying times, is surely a good sign from the gods, old and new. Jon congratulated the young man. What he didn't say aloud was that his relief and happiness stemmed in part from the fact that the Baratheon succession was now secure. With Robert declaring Joffrey and Myrcella as bastards, the Prince of Dragonstone became the natural heir of the king. With Stannis having a son, the succession was secured for 2 generations in the absence of any heirs born of Robert's body. Thank you, Lord Arryn. Stannis nodded gracefully. Lady Selyse labored for many hours, and Maester Crescent was rightly worried as she went into labor 2 months early, but Lady Selyse was brave, and I suppose the healing water from the healing springs of the old gods also helped. Ser Davos said, making Jon frown. Healing springs? He asked curiously. He saw Ser Davos look stricken for a moment, and looked at Stannis hesitantly. Seeing the Lord of Dragonstone was not showing any protest, Ser Davos elaborated. Aye, my lord. Lord Harry Stark made them on his visit to the island. The waters have been blessed by the old gods and the young lord's magic. All ailments disappear when people drink the water from the springs. Jon was a little surprised to hear this, as he had not heard any such rumors from Dragonstone. For a moment, he went into deep thought. He could not help but think of his own wife and the succession of his seat, the Eyrie. He was bereft of an heir of his blood. All his immediate blood relations were taken by the stranger before their time. Sure, he had some relatives in Galltown, and young Harold was his kin, but his thoughts went to his young wife and the many miscarriages she suffered. Perhaps I should consider paying a visit to this healing water, Jon thought. He had seen the power of the old gods with his own eyes, and he had never been so scared in his life. The seven were stubbornly silent despite years of prayers, and at one point he had stopped bothering after seeing the passing of his family. He had come to realize that the gods were mysterious and cared not for the perils of lesser men. Therefore, he had learned to live with silent, uncaring gods for decades. But he saw with his own eyes the old gods act against the Septons, who tried to burn their abode. Deep inside him, he realized a part of him hoped there was a divine power that was just, righteous, and loving. He yearned for such a divine power. He could submit his worries, hopes, and dreams at the altar of faith. He wished he could do that for a long while, but he had always known the gods would meet him with more silence. The door of the small council chambers swung open, making Jon jolt out of his thoughts. It was none other than Lord Varys, and Jon immediately tried to regain his composure. "I was not aware there was a small council meeting, my lords," said the spider. "There wasn't," he replied. "I was just having a small conversation with Prince Stannis and offering my best wishes for his newborn son." "Ah, my best wishes to the young one, my lord. I hope you convey my good wishes to Lady Salis as well," Varys said, bowing his head low to the waist. "Thank you, Lord Varys. I assume you have some other reason for your presence," Stannis observed.
"I'm afraid so, my prince,"
Varys, but kept his silence while looking pointedly at Sir Davos Seaworth. "Ah, my apologies, my lords, my prince." The Onion Knight made a quick retreat from the chamber. "I've heard songs from my little birds in the Reach. Tumbleton and Bitterbridge have fallen to the Lannister army," Varys declared the moment the door shut behind the Onion Knight. "What?" Jon was shocked. "Hey, my Lord Hand. I'm afraid Lord Tywin was purposefully distracting his grace to march his way to Highgarden and then to Old Oak," Varys said a tad grimly. "How? How could we have missed this?" Jon asked with disbelief. "Lord Tywin's army was brutal. They killed everything that moved in their path. According to my little birds, Sir Kevan led a host against Tumbleton, while Sir Adam Marbrand led another host against Bitterbridge. Sir Nedder, Warch, and Sandor Clegane were unleashed on the unsuspecting Reachmen. Their brutality and speed ensured word did not spread far of their movements. The silence that prevailed in the small council chambers was thick. Jon rightly understood Stannis was most upset because the Crown had charged Lord Giles Rosby to watch the Gold Road. "Lord Rosby has failed his task. Either he is an incompetent idiot or a traitor to the Crown," Stannis said coldly, gritting his teeth. "We'll not be accusing anyone of treason without evidence." Jon admonished the younger Baratheon, who just grunted non-committally. "Now I'll make the arrangements to inform his grace about another army riding towards him." "What else can you tell us about this host, Lord Varys?" "Yeah, I assume you have some information about the disposition of this army." Jon looked imploringly at the Master of Whispers, and the man didn't disappoint. "Both Sir Kevan's host and Sir Adam Marbrand's host are filled with mounted men. They have very few spearmen and archers in their hosts. They have a combined strength of 9,000 at most, and 8,000 at the least. Banners of Lannister, Banifort, Lydon, Marbrand, Plum, Estran, and Greenfield were cited among the two hosts." Varys reported diligently, "We'll have to respond to this aggression. The Westermen cannot be allowed to do as they please in the Reach." Jon said resolutely, "On the contrary, Lord Arryn. I believe they must be left alone, and we must turn our sights on the Westerlands." Stannis said after a moment of thought, "No doubt Sir Kevan hopes to draw out our armies from the city and fight them in a place of their choosing. I'm less inclined to act as the Lannisters expect of me." "What are you suggesting, Prince Stannis?" Jon asked, as he was aware his fighting days were over. He could hardly put on his armor, much less fight on a battlefield in his old age. "I believe we must consider an invasion into the heart of the Westerlands through the Gold Road and put pressure on Casterly Rock. If the Riverlanders also comply and invade through Lion's Tooth." Jon couldn't help but chuckle at Stannis' grand plan. He was reminded of Robert's bull-headed nature in this instance. "It seemed the Baratheon brothers are not so different as they believe," he thought amusedly. "You disagree, Lord Arryn." Stannis frowned in displeasure. "Invading the Westerlands through the Gold Road is a sordid affair, my prince. The passes are narrow and hilly. Not to mention, no one in centuries has invaded the Westerlands with a large army through the Gold Road. We will be leading our army into the Lion's Den with no foreknowledge of the terrain. We'll be at a huge disadvantage. Then what do you suggest, Lord Hand? Stannis asked with gritted teeth. We reinforce the city and focus on invading through the Riverlands. The Riverlords fought many battles against the Westermen in the past. They know the passes well, and we could start by taking Golden Tooth. I've already sent for Sir Brynden Tully to take command of some knights and chart a strategy to invade Lord Tywin's territory, said Jon. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but my little birds tell me that Tyrion Lannister is traveling to River Run to negotiate peace with the Tullys. It seems Lord Tywin wants desperately to keep the Riverlands out of the war, said Varys, a simpering smile on his face when Stannis looked at the spider sharply. And you could not have told me this earlier. Stannis looked coldly at the Master of Whispers. My lord, I'm but a man, not a sorcerer. I cannot promise you miracles. It takes time for word to travel from the Westerlands, and the war will only delay it further. Varys defended himself. Lord Varys is right. We must rather focus on the Riverlands and foiling Tyrion Lannister's overtures for peace or neutrality with the Riverlords, said Jon. How exactly are we to do that? Asked Stannis, with a raised eyebrow. I'll have to go and meet the Riverlords. It'll also help me to gather the Knights of the Vale to my side as they march down the Bloody Gate. I suppose that seems to be a reasonable proposition. What about the North? Have there been any word from Lord Stark? Asked Stannis. The North seemed to be going through an internal turmoil of sorts, and it involves House Hightower and House Mormont. It seemed Lord Jorah Mormont mismanaged his house's wealth in a bid to accommodate his Hightower wife's lavish spending. He turned to engage in the slave trade to cover his spending, which put him at odds with the rest of the North. Last I heard, Lord Stark had ridden out from Winterfell to put Lord Mormont's head on a spike. I see. Stannis looked unimpressed. On a lighter note, banners have gathered at Winterfell faster as a result of this affair. Lady Stark is also said to be hosting the Lords of the North as they arrive at Winterfell, Varys reported, which was not something Jon was ignorant about. Winterfell had long ago conveyed the troubles in the North. Jon would not begrudge Edard for taking necessary action against Mormont even if it delayed the Northern army from marching south. I'm interested in knowing whether Lord Stark intends to take Harry Stark along when he marches his army south. The Stark boy's magic will be a boon, and not to mention that airship of his can come in handy in the war, Stannis commented. Jon was also curious to know. After all, Harry Stark was now 11 days old. The boy could serve as a page in the camp, and that strange flying contraption Stannis was talking about sounded like something quite useful for moving troops anonymously. He hoped Edward brought his second son with him. This whole mess started because of the boy's magic. It might as well do some good in ending this useless war far sooner and with less bloodshed. There is another delicate matter that needs your attention, my lords. It concerns the new patrons of Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen. Jon barely held back, a groan upon hearing that. He had all but forgotten about the Targaryen children. What about them? Stannis asked in a reserved manner. They're being hosted and entertained by some of the more prominent magisters of Myr. It's also worth mentioning that Myr recently sent cutthroats after Harry Stark. Oh, stop that, Bran! Oh, stop it! I said. Harry tried his best to keep his hair out of the reach of his little brother, who was committed to pulling it right out of his scalp. Bran just giggled and continued his assault on his hair, showing no mercy. You know, you should have listened to me and given me what I wanted. Sansa said, sticking out her tongue at him as she walked towards the door, carrying a bundle of fresh clothes in her hand. You asked me for Fenris so that you can use him to intimidate some poor girls in Wintertown. Harry said blandly, since you didn't, you get to watch Bran while Jane and I enjoy some lemon cakes, said Sansa, snottily turning up her nose and making her exit in quick order. You should discipline her, said Harry, looking at his mother, who was down with a cold lying in her bed under a pile of warm blankets. You are one to talk about discipline, Harry. Catelyn whispered from under the blankets. Harry opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it at the last moment. He looked thoughtful for a moment before eyeing his mother curiously. Is that why you don't want me to go with Father South? He asked curiously. He was pretty surprised to learn that Robb, Theon, and Garland were allowed to go south with his father for the war. To be fair, Robb was going to be his father's cupbearer, Theon was going to be a page, and Garland was going as his squire for Ser Jorah Castle. He was quite happy to be left out of going south and engaging in some stupid war that did not interest him. Sure, he was rooting for King Robert to win, but not enough to directly contribute to the war. He had his fair share of war and was quite happy to let others fight in the field. Besides, his energy and resources were better spent in the north preparing for the long night. But that doesn't mean he was a bit annoyed when the Lord of Winterfell called him before the whole court of Winterfell and assigned him the prestigious position of the Stark of Winterfell. The Stark of Winterfell, what does that even mean? Harry asked aloud while simultaneously letting out an annoyed sigh. He could even see a sliver of a smile on his mother's face at his annoyance. This is not a matter of joking, Mother. What does my position exactly entail? Can I order the servants to my whim? You already do that, Catelyn pointed out. Well, can I order around the guards to my whim? I challenge you to show me any guard that disobeys the Black Wolf. Harry was now scowling. Well, can I make decisions that pertain to the castle's defenses and such? Catelyn only looked at him pointedly. I guess I've already done that before when I rebuilt the astronomy tower on a whim, Harry muttered. The Stark of Winterfell is the heir to the castle, Harryan. Your father and brother are going to war, and you are his chosen heir. If the North found itself in peril, the lords of the North would look upon you to protect them and lead them as a Stark. That is what it means to be a Stark of Winterfell. Catelyn explained slowly, her hands reaching out and pinching her son's cheek. It is a position of great responsibility. Now keep an eye on your siblings and let your mother get some rest. I suppose I should. Bran once again tugged his hair sharply. I think it's time that you and I have a serious talk about boundaries. Little brother, Harry growled, but Bran just looked at him with an innocent look. As he took Bran out of his mother's chambers, he wondered whether his father managed to capture Jorah Mormont. He had offered his heirship for his father, but his father rather took a contingent of soldiers along with Robb, Theon, and Garland with him on the trip to Bear Island. It was a shame, though. He so wanted to visit the island. Perhaps some other time, he thought. Patrice looked at the prone form of his youngest son with nothing but sorrow in his heart. The Silent Sisters had cleaned the body from head to toe, but his son would never smile that'd make any maiden blush. His son would not jape with his friends, and his son wouldn't be there by his side in the hunts. He reached out and patted the boyish face of Gwayne one last time. You were brave, my son, Patrice muttered, adjusting the Oakart cloak that covered his son's body. His son was quite unlucky. The men had managed to storm the Lannister camp and chase them away, but his son had the misfortune of facing the mountain all alone. His brave son had managed to hold on to his life for a while, but he bled out before the maester could close his wound. The men sang about Gwayne's bravery, but words could not bring his son back to life. He felt the wind rustle as another presence joined him by his side. My lord, the scouts have spotted enemy banners, Sarah Lester Redmayne reported gravely. How far away, he asked, not taking his eyes off his son's closed eyes. 1.5 miles. The scouts just came back with the word. The Florents have finished digging the trenches. They are busy covering them. Sir Desmond has taken command of the archers and standing ready at the wall. Sir Das, Alistair reported. I see. Has the oil been prepared? What about the ballista and windlasses? Patrice asked quietly. Everything is ready, my lord. Has there been any word from Highgarden? Patrice asked. I'm afraid not, my lord. Sir Alistair shook his head. So we'll have to hold out for as long as we can, while the Lannisters put Old Oak under a grueling siege, he said grimly. Aye, my lord. It looks to be that way. Sir Alistair looked pained in admitting that. Letting out a sigh, Patrice removed himself from Gwayne's side. Do we know the numbers of the enemy? Patrice asked, walking along a drawbridge that let him cross into one of the towers that overlooked the parts of the castle's north side. I'm afraid not, my lord. But some of the scouts claim they saw fires coming from further east. They suspect there is another Lannister army apart from the main host. It could be the Lannister army that was attacking Northmarch, Patrice said with a thoughtful frown. Could be. Sir Alistair nodded, but he had his doubts. But why are they separated from the main force? Patrice asked, looking thoughtful. It could be a distraction set up to confuse our scouts. Maybe Lord Tywin wants us to think he has a larger army than we think. I suppose we'll know soon enough. Patrice muttered, Then the wait began, and it was a long wait. The Lannister army seemed to be moving at a snail's pace, but Patrice was not complaining. The tardiness of the lions was an opportunity for him. He sent out a company of knights to hunt down any enemy scouts searching for traps, while he had trusted men plant caltrops in select areas as a welcoming present for the Lannisters. They waited and waited and waited, some more, until finally the lookouts planted on the towers signaled them sighting the enemy banners. "Signal the men to open the canals," he ordered.
Aye, my lord.
Sir Alistair quickly managed to send the orders, and the signals were sent to the men stationed at the canals. The water from the lower Mander that flowed through the channels was directed into the fields surrounding Old Oak. The water would destroy the crops in the fields, but it also forced the Lannisters to use the ocean road to transport the entirety of their army. It'd mean the Lannister army would have no other choice but to force Old Oak to surrender if they wanted to move further south. Of course, the Lannister army could march around them by sticking close to the shores, but he doubted Lord Tywin would wish for his forces to fall prey to the forces of House Hewitt and Serry stationed along the shores. He supposed it'd depend on who was commanding the Lannister army. He certainly hoped Gregor Clegane was among the Lannister army. It'd not do for his son's killer to go unpunished in this war. If he could not do the deed, then hopefully a stray arrow or a spear could bring down the mountain that rides. He didn't mind the way Clegane would grace the strangers' halls, but so long as it happened, he'd be a happy man. He took notice when red and gold banners began to emerge in the distance along Ocean Road. The Lannister army was dragging 3 wooden towers along, making their intentions clear for the day. So, that's what kept them back till now. Patrice muttered. He supposed the Lannister army took its time to march to his castle to cover their retreat in the safety of darkness, making it difficult for his men to pursue. That was probably why they chose to siege in the evening. "My lord, the watchers in the towers counted 60 banners among the Lannister army." Sir Alistair reported once the knight returned to his side. "So they are 6,000 strong. It can't be certain. If we assume 100 men follow a banner, then..." Sir Alistair trailed off, looking uncertainly at his liege lord. "We'll make that assumption," said Patrice. "Send word to all commanders." "Aye, my lord." Sir Alistair once again left his side, leaving him with a few men keeping diligent watch over the curtain wall. For once, he wished his ancestors had the foresight to build a second and third wall inside the curtain wall modeled after Highgarden. Perhaps when the war was over, he could call for the builders and plan another wall outside the existing curtain wall of his castle. "It's done, my lord," Sir Alistair reported, and not a moment later, the Lannister army charged the walls. Lannister men raised their shields and tentatively moved forward, mindful of the range of his archers. The archers on the wall under his son's command waited for the Lannister men to enter their range before releasing a volley of arrows. Patrice took up his marish far eyes to observe a few Lannister men go down in a shower of blood. Some had minor injuries, but most managed to shield themselves from the barrage of arrows. More and more lines began to form among the Lannister side, and braved the barrage of arrows sent forth from the wall under Desmond's command. Soon, the Lannister men began running across the field in a bid to evade the arrows of his archers and reach the base of the curtain wall as quickly as possible. The screams of men on the battlefield echoed loud and clear. Patrice looked back, seeing the reserve men under his command sweat not because of the heat, but at the prospect of battle that lay ahead. The enemy down below at the base of the wall must have switched to crossbows because he saw a few archers on his wall fall. "My lord, look. The siege towers are moving," Sir Alistair pointed out. Patrice stared into the distance, and sure enough he could see 2 siege towers moving into the battlefield. "Only 2. One is kept back in reserve," he noted. "Pull the archers a few paces and have the men throw stones at the enemy below. The towers will give cover for the Lannister men. Have the archers switch to flaming arrows," Patrice ordered. "Aye, my lord." Sir Alistair went away with the orders. Patrice continued to watch the progress of his men and the Lannister army. When he saw more Lannister men run into the field with ladders in hand ahead of their siege towers, he knew what the enemy was planning. He immediately ordered his reserve men to guard the towers along the curtain wall, thereby increasing the protection of ballistas and windlasses housed in the towers. "Lord Oakart." Patrice found Lord Alicant to be an easygoing man compared to Lord Alester Florent. "Lord Florent, I suppose we ought to give the Lannisters a warm greeting with steel, eh?" the young Florent said. "Once the siege towers are close, you may hunt the lions at your leisure, Lord Florent, but I have one request." "Oh, what is it, Lord Oakart?" Alikine asked curiously. "If you happen to come across Gregor Clegane, try to bring me his head." "Of course, my lord. I'll make sure Cedar Gwayne is avenged," Alikine promised. Patrice watched the heir of Brightwater Keep leave with a gaggle of knights inside. The florid night reminded him too much of his dearly departed son. He shook his head and kept his eyes on the battlefield. His archers were peppering the siege towers with fiery arrows, but the wooden construct did not catch fire, making him frown. He once again took his far eyes and observed the siege towers more closely. The glare from the sun by accident showed him there was some sort of glazing on the wooden construct. His eyes widened as he belatedly realized the siege tower was drenched with water to resist catching flame. Very clever, but foolish as well. He muttered as he saw a Lannister man slip on a wooden pole and fall on the ground from a height. One of the siege towers went straight for the gatehouse, and he knew the enemy was looking to either burn the gate or use a ram under the safety of the siege tower. "You boy, go and order the garrison near the gatehouse to pour hot oil down those fuckers," he ordered. He watched the boy scurry away with great speed to pass on his order. He patiently waited and watched as the two siege towers steadily gained ground. He began tapping his foot impatiently as his eyes turned to the brattices near the gatehouse. He let out a relieved sigh when he saw the garrison carry 2 pots along the wall walk towards the gatehouse. The archers kept their barrage of arrows against the siege tower to give cover for the garrison. As per his order, the garrison successfully poured down a pot full of hot pitcher oil down through the holes in the brattices. The renewed screams of men begging for mercy from beyond the wall made him smile. "That's right, you fucking lions. We Reachmen know a thing or two of real war, while you lot only know to kill babies and little girls." He thought with some satisfaction, "Give the order for the crossbowmen stationed near the arrow slits of the towers. They are free to engage the enemy." Patrice gave his men another order. He had ordered the men inside all the towers to hold back their attack until they were given orders, as he wanted the Lannister men to feel a false sense of security. Now his towers would have the advantage, as the men down below would not expect the blots of death raining from the arrow slits. The battle raged on, and more men died on both sides. From the looks of it, Patrice was sure more dead was mounting on the Lannister side. It was to be expected, as castles often tend to have the upper hand in a siege. Initially, he supposed it all depended on the resolve of the enemy trying to get inside the walls of his home. If the Lannisters could persist and throw more men for a long time against his castle's defenses, then there'd be cause to fear defeat. They won't come to that. Old Oak shall defy the lions, as it has always done, Patrice thought firmly, assured of his men's ability to hold the castle. "My lord, the tower." Sir Alistair pointed at the siege tower, which swung open at the top, and the men atop threw a makeshift wooden bridge to the wall walk. "Bring that tower down, Sir Alistair. Use the ballista, and bring it down now," he shouted. Patrice also sent word to Lord Alikine and his men to be ready near a secret passage. He watched the garrison along the wall walk stand their ground bravely and fight tooth and nail to deny the enemy any ground on the wall. Archers were being quickly replaced by crossbowmen, spearmen, and swordsmen as the fighting was fast turning into a close-quarter fight. His attention was shifted promptly as a ballista was fired from one of the towers. The bolt, with a thick rope tied at its one end, punched through the siege tower with force. The men in the tower surrounding him shouted elatedly as they watched this happen, but Patrice was not ready to celebrate. "Bring it down, bring it down, bring it down," he kept muttering through gritted teeth as he looked on the battle most eagerly. The weights were thrown down, and the windlass worked its magic by giving a fast tug on the bolt, pulling the siege tower on its side. He let out a shout of joy, watching the siege tower fall with a thundering crash, hopefully killing and entrapping hundreds of Lannister men. "Burn it down, bring whale oil to the walls," Patrice shouted at his men. "Go, you lazy bums, go, burn those fucking lions down." It didn't take long for Patrice to see a yellow glow from the other side of the curtain wall, making him grin from ear to ear. He could smell victory, but he wanted maximum damage to be dealt to the Lannister army, so that he could trim down the enemy numbers. "Send word to Lord Alikine that he is free to hunt down the lions," he ordered with some satisfaction. The renewed screams coming from the Lannister army were quite enjoyable to his ears. His men at the wall let out a collective whoop of joy as they brought down the second siege tower as well, making the Lannisters abandon the field. The fleeing Lannister men were jeered and mocked by the garrison manning the wall, while archers took positions behind the crenellated walls, and began shooting down the fleeing enemy. Cheers of victory rang out in the castle when Lord Elechine and his company of men returned with bloodied swords and a few blonde-haired prisoners. Only time would tell whether they managed to capture someone important from the Lannister army. After all, Patrice was quite curious to learn all about the disposition of the Lannister armies that had crossed into the borders of the Reach and what plans were made by the Old Lion. "Should we send an emissary to the Lannister camp to give them leave to collect their dead?" Sir Alistair asked tentatively after seeing the Lannister army retreating, well beyond the range of their archers. "No." Patrice immediately answered, shaking his head furiously. "Throw their dead into the remains of those siege towers and have them burned. These butchers do not deserve a proper burial. Let the flames take them to the seven hells for what they've done to our lands and people." For good measure, he ordered the archers on the wall to kill anything that moves that comes into their range, even if there was someone under the white flag. That night, the men had every reason to be merry, but Patrice could not afford to join in the merriment. He was, after all, a father who lost his son to the ravages of the war. Therefore, Patrice stood alone at the encampment on the castle wall, where leal men sworn to his house were keeping watch. Down below, he could see the flames turn the last of the dead from the Lannister army, turn to ash and smoke. Young men die while old men live to bury them. Patrice thought grimly, his eyes straying to the sept where his son's body was interned, as were the braves who lost their lives defending the castle. Letting out a sigh, he went back to staring ahead into the black abyss that was the night sky. It was cloudy, and he could see flashes of light in the distance. Signs of rain clouds gathering in the night sky. He hoped there was no rain tonight, as his men were busy building siege engines inside the castle. If he looked north, he could see tiny lights in the distance coming from the Lannister camp. He wondered what was going through the commanders of the Lannister army, and what sort of plans they were concocting in their tents. It was a shame he had no spies in the Lannister camp. "My lord." His musings were cut short with the arrival of Sir Alester Redmayne. "Alester, has the interrogation borne fruit?" he asked, rubbing his gray beard tiredly. "It has, my lord. We captured some distant cousins of the Kingslayer, but the real haul was from the prisoners of Lord Alechyne. He captured Sir Daemon Lannister." Patrice could only frown as the name didn't particularly mean much to him. "Who?" "Sir Daemon is the older half-brother of Stafford Lannister and the late Lady Joanna Lannister. So we have Tywin Lannister's good brother, and you think that's something to boast about?" Patrice asked angrily, making Sir Alester take a step back. "You think Tywin Lannister cares for some unknown half-brother of his dead wife while his son and grandson languish in the cells of Storm's End?" Patrice snarled. No, my lord," Sir Alester stuttered out. "Then don't pretend to think we have somehow won today." "The battle is just starting," Patrice said, looking out into the night, knowing that the peace of the night would be broken by dawn when the killing started anew. "I'm sure you'll not be bored to tears in Winterfell, Harrion. After all, you have the most prestigious position as the Stark of Winterfell." Garland patted him on the shoulder while Theon and Robb chuckled at his expense. "Sure, don't do a shoddy job of polishing armors and filling wine cups, you three. Wouldn't want the Northern Army to be thrown into disarray, thanks to you lot." Harry snarked back, leaving Jon to guffaw and Sansa to giggle. "When I return, I'll see you in the training yard, Stark. We'll see whether you are funny." Then, Garland had the last word as he climbed aboard his horse and rode away with Sir Roderick. Robb hugged him for nearly 5 minutes, after which his twin was forced to climb on his horse and slowly trot away. "Harrion," Edard knelt so that he was level with his son. "You're the Stark of Winterfell now. Listen to Maester Luwin's advice, and do not cause trouble for your mother." "When have I caused trouble?" Harry squinted his eyes at his father. Edard just looked at him and then looked at the army that was marching out of Winterfell, making his point quite clear. "Hey, the Lannister woman is the reason why—" "I know. Just watch over your brothers and sisters while I'm gone. You're the man of the house now," Edard muttered, pressing a kiss to Harry's forehead. "I've enchanted as many weapons and armors as I could. It should give the men an edge in battle," Harry muttered. Edard smiled but said nothing before moving to Jon, Sansa, Arya, and Bran to say his goodbyes. The entirety of Winterfell and Wintertown was assembled outside to see off the men marching off to war. There was strong dissent among the northern lords in participating in a war that had nothing to do with them. Harry had managed to glean that many of the northern lords were all for turning a blind eye to the happenings of the south. But his father had persisted in his attempts to woo the northern lords to follow him once again to the south. The whole issue with Jorah Mormont seems to have taken all the air from the sails of the northern lords, and his father, being a loyal friend of King Robert, used the incident to guilt-trip the lords of the north to fight the dance of stags and lions, as the maesters were calling it. I'm surprised father managed to bring those troublesome lot to his way of thinking. All the shouting, huffing, and puffing inside the castle made me think a fight was going to break out in the last couple of days. Harry said to Maester Luwin once they were safely back inside his father's solar. Lord Stark convinced his fellow lords it blemished the North's prestige if they were to ignore the king's call to arms, especially after Mormont brought shame to the North by engaging in slavery, said Maester Luwin, collapsing into a chair opposite Harry. Has there been any word on the absconding Lord Mormont and his Hightower wife? Harry asked curiously. Most likely they're on a ship trying to sail around Dorne without getting caught by the Red Wine fleet. The most likely destination is one of the free cities of Essos. Harry looked thoughtful for a moment. All right. Send a raven to Hightower and Arbor about the absconding couple. With the war in the south, the Red Wine fleet would be patrolling the Sunset Seas to the best of their abilities. They could come across the couple if they are lucky. I shall draft the letter immediately. Maester Luwin nodded before fishing out several sheets of parchment and placing them on the table for Harry's attention. Now, there are some petitioners from House Tallheart about possibly lowering the tariffs on lumber. I've prepared a list of tariffs we currently impose on certain trees. Harry sat up straight and kept his ears on full alert as he listened to Maester Luwin. The downside of his stellar performance in managing Avalon was that he was saddled with some of the administrative work by a mutual agreement between his father, Vayon Poole, and Maester Luwin. The three men called it preparing him for the lordship of Avalon, and as the future advisor to Robb, he suspected his father purposefully left him a mountain of work to keep him buried under a mountain of paperwork and grievances of the northern lords, merchants, and small folk. Harry prided himself on being a demigod of bureaucracy. He was all too happy to wade into the muddy waters and make something out of it, come heaven or hell. If he could clean up the astronomically incompetent British Ministry of Magic within a few years, then the North was a piece of Sansa's favorite lemon cake. Speaking of which, he was getting quite hungry, and Harry supposed he wouldn't say no to one lemon cake. Fires raged across the battlefield as men fought, shedding blood and tears. The dead pile up on either side of the curtain wall of Old Oak. Patrice Oakart looked on at the grim reality of war. No matter the preparations or resolve, war has always had the effect of breaking even the hardest of men. Even the most honorable lot turn to depravity when war knocks on their doorstep. Therefore, he was not surprised to see the finest knights of the Reach, the most chivalrous of knights in the Seven Kingdoms, turn to wanton cruelty. He watched coldly as the men under his command dragged the captured Lannister soldiers from the siege, getting pulled through the paved ground, beaten and bruised. He didn't put a stop to his men when Lannister men cried for mercy, nor did he stop the brutality when Lannister men were hung, beheaded, or even when their limbs got chopped off by overzealous men consumed by their bloodlust. Shall I intervene and put a stop to it, my lord? Sara Lester asked him as the men down below began cheering and shouting obscenities at the new prisoners they captured in the evening after they beat back the Lannisters for the 5th time. No. The men have lost friends and family in this siege, and the invasion, let them be for now. We'll need them filled with bloodlust on the morrow. Patrice muttered before turning his eyes to the Lannister camp in the distance. My lord, let me take the watch tonight. You're tired. Please take rest, Sir Alliser insisted. Even if Patrice wanted to protest, he knew he was tired in body and soul. He was in no condition to keep watch for the whole night. The strain of the command was creeping in, especially after the grueling siege Old Oak was facing in the last few days. All right, Patrice muttered as he relieved himself from his post and charged his trusted captain of the guards to take command of the defenses. As he climbed down from his post at the tower, he was greeted by his men warmly. He exchanged some pleasantries with them before retiring to his quarters. After having a warm bath, he sent for dinner and invited Lord Alakine Florent and his eldest son Desmond to attend. He even sent for the lesser lords like Ball, Cockshaw, and Graceford, as they were loyal bannermen. It wouldn't be wise to slight the lord supporting him while the Lannister army was at his gates. The old line was a wily foe and knew he had to be careful, as Lord Tywin's gold tended to have the power to make enemies into friends. "Welcome, my lords. I'm afraid the spread is not as rich as one would expect," Patrice said. Indeed, the dinner table was sparsely filled with delicacies that attract the refined tastes of the nobility of the Reach. There was bread, pork, tomato sauce, beef, and very little apple pie. There was wine, however. He had to take his oldest cask of Arbor Gold for the occasion. But he ensured the wine was watered down, as he didn't want the lords or his son inebriated on the morrow. "On the contrary, this is a fine spread, considering the Lannister army is sieging us, my lord," said Lord Alakine. "Lord Florence speaks true. This is a fine spread, my lord," said Lord Owen Ball. "Aye," said Lord Harris Graceford. "You needn't have bothered, my lord, with the passing of brave Gwayne and all," Lord Alan Cockshaw said, trailing off with a pained look. Patrice was reminded that his son had served as a squire under Lord Cockshaw. He supposed he was not the only one who grieved for his son. It was a nice sentiment. While his son's body did not remain, Gwayne lived in the hearts of those who knew and loved him. Gwayne would not wish for his family to grieve for him for days without end. He lived his life to the fullest and died an honorable death while discharging his duties as a Knight of the Reach, said Desmond. Patrice was surprised to see that level of firmness from his eldest son. None grieved as hard as Desmond when word of Gwayne's passing reached them. He supposed the ravages of the war hardened his son. Aye, Sir Gwayne was a fine knight. He died as a warrior with a sword in hand, brave till his last breath. Lord Alakine took to his feet, raising his wine cup. To Sir Gwayne, may he be welcomed by the warrior in the heavens, for he had died for the noblest of causes. To Gwayne! They all raised their cups to toast the dearly departed Gwayne Oakart. The rest of the dinner passed without much fanfare, as their topic of discussion turned to the defenses of the castle and the word that recently filtered in from further north about House Crane of the Red Lake. Some refugees spoke of a great battle being fought on the shores of the Red Lake between House Crane and the Lannister army. It was still being determined who won, but they hoped House Crane would not easily surrender to the Lions. As one of the principal houses of the North March, House Crane guards some of the most fertile farmlands in the Reach, and most importantly, they hold the channels that drew water from the lower Mander into the fields close to Old Oak. The canals continued to spill water into the farmlands east of Old Oak, muddying the fields and roads and making it harder for the Lannister army to go around his castle. So, it should mean House Crane had not been beaten and stood firm against the Lannister assault. Patrice hoped the Highgarden would send reinforcements, as Old Oak was under a grueling siege. He did not see the resolve of the Lannisters shifting despite their losses the last few days. From interrogating the prisoners, Patrice knew Tygett Lannister was commanding the Lannister army facing him. He also knew the Lannister army was not at full strength, but that could change any day. The prisoners he took indicated that a second host was marching down the ocean road from Lannisport under Stafford Lannister's command. Therefore, it was with a heavy heart that Patrice went to bed that night. He prayed the second host never reaches Old Oak before the royal host or even the reinforcements from Highgarden. He was forced to wake up when he heard bells being tolled inside the castle. He was wide awake, threw open the door, and ran for the battlements as men ran around him, hastily taking up their weapons and rushing to their posts. He ran straight for his overwatch tower. He climbed the flight of stairs inside the tower as fast as his legs could carry, until he finally managed to reach the top. He was out of breath and sweating galleons, but the sheer urgency of the situation allowed him to overcome such simple snags. Patrice immediately used his marish far eyes and searched the battlefield for enemy movements. In the distance, he could see some activity, but could not confirm whether the Lannister army was making a move because of the darkness. The first light had yet to appear, and there was fog, making it nearly impossible to confirm. He didn't know why the guards would toll the bells if there were no apparent signs of the enemy attack. But it was better to be safe than sorry. Signal the men to arm the trebuchets, Patrice ordered. Using a combination of drums and horns, his tower conveyed the orders to the men in charge of the siege engines. He didn't have to wait long, as the men let loose 2 salvos of flaming stones into the enemy lines. The dark skies lit up as two bright balls of fire streaked across the battlefield and struck straight into enemy lines. Patrice observed the two sites where the fireballs hit the ground, but nothing moved behind the enemy lines. "My lord." "Sir Alistair!" Patrice was taken aback as the captain of the guards rushed into his watchtower. "My lord, we are being attacked from the south," Sir Alistair reported after catching his breath. "What? That's impossible." Patrice shook his head, refusing to believe the Lannister army somehow managed to slip past their notice around the castle. "It's true, my lord. I've already diverted the men to the wall walk to the southern side of the curtain wall. But it's only a temporary measure. We need you there, my lord," said Sir Alistair. Patrice didn't want to believe it, but Sir Alistair was a knight he trusted. He couldn't fathom how the Lannister army managed to circle his castle and attack from the south without alerting the scouts he had stationed along all the major passes. He was under no misconception that opening the canals and flooding the fields would stop the Lannister army's advancement, but he was sure it'd delay many men from crossing to the other side. That delay was all he needed to send out his cavalry and ride them down into the muddy waters of the Reach and destroy them. However, the Lannisters somehow thwarted him and gained a momentary advantage. This cannot be allowed to stand. "Find my son and have him take command of this tower. The defenses of the north wall are his responsibility, and you shall assist him." "As you wish, my lord." Sir Alistair nodded. With that matter resolved, Patrice immediately set out to the southern wall. On the way, he collected additional troops from Lords Graceford and Ball. He left Lord Alakine in charge of the defenses in the north, with his son, as the Florent heir was already familiar with the command structure and defenses of the wall. The Florent knights were exceptionally gifted when it came to riding out from the secret entrance and breaking the Lannister siege, or even riding down the fleeing Lannister army. Most prisoners they took from the Lannister army were thanks to Lord Alakine and his knights. He did not see any reason to pull the man from his excellent work so far at the north wall without a cause. Besides, having Lord Alakine with his son and Sir Alistair at the north wall left him with less worry should the Lannister army attack the north wall while they distract him at the south wall. When he finally managed to make it to the southern part of the curtain wall, the whole castle shook with a huge booming sound echoing inside the castle walls. "My lord, look!" Lord Harris Graceford pointed at the sky further north as an orange glow could be seen coming from outside the wall. "Siege engines," Lord Owen Ball muttered, a little bit of fear in his sound. "Do not worry, my lord. Old Oak may not have multiple walls, but our one curtain wall is 20 feet thick. The lions are welcome to try their best to test my wall, but it'll hold strong against their siege engines," Patrice said, confident that his ancestral castle could withstand the siege engines. Instead of worrying about what might happen at the north wall, he focused his efforts on the southern wall. He immediately ran over to a tower and climbed the flight of stairs until he reached the very top and set himself on the turret. "Lord Graceford, I suggest you take up command of the siege engines and wait for my signal," Patrice ordered. The red-haired man nodded and immediately set off from the turret after one look into the distance, where little spots of light could be seen moving in the dark. "Lord Ball, I hope you're comfortable taking command of the reserve soldiers and waiting for my signal at the gates. I'll need you and your men if we are to chase away the Lannister army after throwing them back from the wall." "As you wish, my lord." "What do you do?" "I'll take command of the wall. Go, my lord. Should I need your assistance, I'll call for you." Lord Owen Ball nodded and sprinted down the stairs as fast as possible. Patrice walked the battlements, shouting orders and placing archers along the crenellated wall walk. He also oversaw the movement of essential supplies for the archers and crossbowmen to throw back the enemy. The supply depots in the castle were taking time to divert crucial supplies like helmets and armor, as they prioritized arming the men with bows, crossbows, arrows, and bolts. Patrice knew there would be a cost to pay for that shortcoming, but he could do nothing to pick up the pacing of arming his men. Even he had foregone armor and a helmet in his rush to take command of the southern wall. So there's no more time, and they had to defend the castle with what they had. "Archers, loose," Patrice shouted. The first volley they sent out were flaming arrows that not only had the intended effect of putting some fear in the enemy, but also increased the visibility of his men. He ordered another fresh salvo of fire arrows to rain down on the enemy soldiers rushing towards his castle with screams in their throats. He saw Lannister men go down with painful screams as fiery arrows punched through their flesh and bones. Volley after volley rained down on the enemy, but their resolve held firm. The ground below was now littered with little spots of flames thanks to the flaming arrows, which had the added effect of visibility. It made the job of the archers much easier in targeting the enemy. As the battlefield became more visible, Patrice saw the enemy trying their best to put ladders against the castle walls. But try as they might, he was determined to see not one Lannister soldier climb his wall. When the first light shined down on the battlefield after hours from the renewed assault on Old Oak, the Lannister army was nowhere near its objective of setting its foot on the wall. Patrice looked down from his tower as Lannister soldiers bravely and foolishly tried their best to scale the wall, but it was 50 feet high. No matter the bravery of Lannister men, climbing a wall that high was no easy task. Without a siege tower, it was nigh impossible to scale the curtain wall of Old Oak. Fortunately, Patrice saw no siege tower in the enemy's possession. This gave the advantage to his archers, who masterfully hid behind merlons and fell many Lannister men in the field. When Lannister men tried to use the ram against his gates, they were swiftly felled by stones being dropped on their heads through brattices. As the southern gate of his castle was not protected by bronze plating like the northern gate, a fire could do more damage to the door, even though the wood used was ironwood. Therefore, he forbade the use of pitcher oil and instead used boiling water to dislodge the enemy from the gatehouse. My lord, a message from Ser Alistair. Lord Desmond and Alakine managed to beat back the enemy. The siege engines destroyed the siege towers of the enemy. There were huge casualties on the Lannister side. He says the Lannister army is in full retreat. He seeks your permission to ride out and rout the enemy from their camp, my lord. The messenger managed to spill out in one breath. There was a roar of approval from his men at the wall, who were fortunate enough to hear the good news. Keep your eyes on the enemy. We've not won yet. Patrice barked out sharply, forcing his men to go back to defending the castle. But word quickly spread regarding the victory, making men renew their efforts to throw out the invaders. Turning back to the messenger, Patrice saw the eager look on the soldier's face. No, we cannot afford to attack the Lannister camp without knowing their strength and defenses. Tell Ser Alistair to stand down. Patrice ordered, But my lord, we have them on the run, the young man sputtered indignantly. Do what you're told to do, boy. Tell the men to stand down. That's an order. Patrice snapped, making the messenger fling and nod fearfully. A loud horn suddenly blared from the south, gaining Patrice's attention. At first, he thought the horn was being blown from the Lannister side, and they were making a retreat, but when he looked with his far eyes, he saw a black banner in the distance. His eyes widened when he saw many more banners. Some were very familiar to his eyes. He saw the Golden Rose of House Tyrell, the Lone Tower of House Hightower, the Red Fox of House Florent, and many more such banners. There were even banners of black and white swans of House Swan, 3 brass buckles of House Buckler, yellow wheat stalks of House Salmi, and many more. He revisited the black banner, and there in the field, he saw the crowned stag fluttering proudly in the wind. You boy, tell Ser Alistair to gather anyone who wants to kill some Lannisters to come here. The king has come to our rescue. Spread the word now, he shouted. The shouts of joy let out by his men as the Baratheon army pounced on the lions from their rear shook the sky. It was a bloodbath, and Patrice saw no reason not to bloody his sword. So, he opened the gates and led his men out in a charge, crushing the trapped Lannister army with nowhere to go. No prisoners! Kill the bastards! Kill them all! Patrice shouted as he charged ahead, eager to see justice done, for he could see the banner of 3 dogs near the Lannister lion. Robert Baratheon never felt as alive as in this moment. He was a drunkard and a whoremonger, but he was not born for that pointed chair. He knew that more than anyone else. The throne suited him ill. He had said so many times to Jon Arryn. He thrived most on a battlefield where he could care less. For all the pompousness and fakery, the court bothered him not. Only luck and skill mattered on the battlefield. That was where he truly thrived and lived. Nothing else could excite him as such in the world, except for his precious Lyanna. But the dragons took her from him. He caved in the dragon prince's chest at the trident for her, and he killed Rhaegar again 1,000 times in his dreams. It'd never bring Lyanna back. Therefore, it was the battlefield for him. He was wedded to it like a newly married groom, and like all newlyweds, he tried to please the battlefield. Robert swung God's grief with full force. The hammer weighed little in his hand, but the blow crushed a Lannister man's head like a smashed egg. Blood and brain matter was everywhere. Making Robert laugh, he moved on to the next victim and swung. This time, his hammer struck the chest of a knight who tried to engage him. The knight coughed up blood and was blown away from his horse, with armor punched in under the mighty power of God's grief. Robert laughed maniacally as he was unstoppable on the battlefield. He smashed and killed his way through the Lannister army, ignoring what was happening around him. With God's grief in his hand, he felt like a god. He spun the hammer around by the leather holder at the end of the handle and smacked away anyone that dared to challenge him. Shields splintered and swords shattered under his blows, and soon he was drenched in the blood of his enemies. He roared out in challenge, asking for the men to give him a good fight, but the wimps of the Lannister army turned tail and ran. "Cowards, come and fight me! Come and die by my hands!" Robert roared, his limbs filled with unholy strength, and he was most eager to bloody his hammer some more. Only one man didn't run, and Robert laughed at seeing this. He recognized the giant rushing towards him with a massive sword in hand. Robert jumped down from his horse and went straight for Gregor Clegane, screaming eagerly despite the protests from Ser Barristan and Ser Eris Oakart. Robert ducked under the swinging sword of Clegane and smacked the knight on his back with God's grief. A sickening crack was heard, despite the screams and clash of steel all around Robert. Clegane fell forward with a pained cry. But Robert didn't take this opportunity to finish off the giant knight. Instead, he waited for Tywin's mad dog to climb back to his feet. He also noticed the men were forming a circle around the two of them, as men watched this bout most eagerly. When Clegane climbed to his feet and rushed at Robert, he swatted away the giant man's sword with a simple swing of God's grief, leaving Clegane wide open. He smashed the knight's knee, making the man scream to the heavens in pain. Clegane keeled over and fell to a knee, clutching his ruined knee and screaming his throat out. Robert didn't wait around this time and smashed his hammer against the giant's sword arm. Another sickening crack could be heard, and Clegane screamed some more. "I should have had you killed like Ned wanted, but Tywin fucking Lannister saved your hide back then. Now you get what you deserve, you sick fuck," Robert snarled, spinning God's grief in his hands. With his two hands on God's grief, he swung hard. Clegane's head cracked open like a watermelon and sprayed its contents all over the ground. The giant knight fell to the ground with a thud, never to rise again. The men screamed and shouted, celebrating the death of Clegane and his victory. "Robert, Robert, 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 Robert," the crowd chanted. Robert basked in the glory and enjoyed the adoration of the crowd. "Your Grace, welcome to Old Oak. You'll find my castle most accommodating. What shall I prepare for your liking?" Lord Patrice Oakart shouted over the celebrations. "More Lannisters to kill would be to my liking, my lord," Robert said, making his men laugh and celebrate all the rowdier. "I can arrange for that. Your Grace, we have the Lannisters on the run on the northern side of the castle. Should your Grace wish it, I'll happily open the gates, and we could rout the Lannister army," Lord Oakart offered. "Then lead the way, Lord Oakart. Let's hunt some lions," Robert shouted, making his men respond in kind as they were most eager to fight some more. Robert led the charge out of the northern gate of Old Oak, and the might of the Demon of the Trident swept away the Lannister army. "My prince, the men are ready," Ser Davos reported. Stannis need not look at his trusted knight's face to see the former smuggler was having second thoughts. "You disapprove of my decision," Stannis observed. "Taking the Crownland army to fight in the Reach would leave the capital undefended. You're also his Grace's heir as the Prince of Dragonstone. Should something happen to you," Ser Davos trailed off. "Jonan had the same concerns. Nothing will happen to me. And even if something were to happen, my son Stefan shall become the Prince of Dragonstone and Robert's heir," said Stannis, climbing his horse and making himself comfortable on the saddle. "The defenses of the capital. I take only half of the Crownland forces. I'm sure you can defend the city with half the numbers. Besides, Lord Arryn's efforts are best spent on rallying the Riverlords to our cause, said Stannis. I shall convey your wishes, my prince, Sir Davos said with a sigh. Good, now keep the fleet at the ready. I doubt the royal fleet will be challenged at the Gullet, but Tywin might hire cells for his cause. I shall keep my ears open for any word of such from my old contacts, my prince, said Davos. Good, Stannis nodded, donning his helmet and riding ahead of the assembled army. Men, we ride today to put an end to the lions invading the Reach. Now who's with me? Excited yells and shouting were the answer he earned from the Crownland army. Then let's go kill some lions. Stannis punched his fist in the air and galloped away on his horse with the army closely following him. While riding ahead into the Reach through the Ros Road, he turned his head and eyed the giant weirwood tree that had sprung up in the Red Keep. The red leaves of the tree could be seen standing tall on Aegon's hill. He hoped the old gods were not wrong, and he'd have everything he wanted towards the end of this war. The tree he planted, becoming a giant weirwood tree over a few months, was a good omen in his eyes. He did not have any personal ambition for a crown, but now that he had a son, he was more than happy to accept the kingship of the Seven Kingdoms. With the hope of sitting on the Iron Throne, Stannis rode ahead on his horse, picking up speed. He could feel it in his bones. His time had come to reign as king. He only needs to wait a little bit longer. Doran supposed there was ample reason to celebrate, considering the war between the stags and the lions was reaching its precipice. The last he heard from his neighbors, the Reach was getting the same treatment the Riverlands had been enjoying since the Andal invasions. The Riverlands had always been the battlefield whenever a major war was waged in Westeros, but now battles were being waged all over the Reach, turning the fertile farmlands of one of the most prosperous kingdoms of Westeros into burned-out wastelands. He supposed he should be overjoyed at the Lannister action, but that joy was only short-lived. Even as he watched his people dance and drink to their heart's content because of the war, he didn't feel much happiness in his mind. He smiled and acted merry while facing the lords and ladies of Dorne because it was expected of him. It was Tywin Lannister and his dogs he wanted to suffer for the crimes against his dear sister and her children. He certainly did not enjoy the fact that the Lannister army was cutting a bloody swath through the Reach. The war just happened to pit some of his strongest rivals against each other. The one good thing he looked forward to in this war was the weakening of the Baratheon dynasty. He felt like this was the turning point in the short reign of Robert Baratheon. Perhaps it's time to reach out to Viserys, Dorne thought. It'd not do if the young prince forgets his duty and what is owed to House Martell. My prince. Dorne kept his musings to a corner of his mind as he smiled at Lord Franklin Fowler, Anders Arrowwood, and Lady Delone Alarion. My lords, my lady, please come and sit. Dorne welcomed them cordially, while Aeron Hada, his trusted guard, pulled up the seats for his fellow Dornish nobility to join him. This is a lavish ball, the likes of which Dorne has not seen in a decade, said Lady Delone, while servants brought bowls of peeled red oranges for his guests to enjoy. When enemies weaken themselves out of their violation, there is cause for celebration, isn't that so, my prince? Anders Yornwood laughed. Dorne grinned and merely nodded at Lord Yornwood. Speaking of which, what are your plans, my prince? Indeed, this is a unique opportunity to exact Dorne's vengeance on the lions. Lord Franklin said, involving ourselves now will only make us useful fodder for Robert Baratheon's armies. He'll throw us at the lions and use us for his benefit, said Dorne in a calm and even tone. He could see the disappointment on the faces of his fellow Dornishmen as clear as day. However, that doesn't mean we'll stay put in this war. As Lord Franklin rightly said, this is a unique opportunity to exact Dorne's vengeance on the lions. Dorne added, brightening up the faces of his fellow Dornishmen. So you have a plan. How can we aid our prince? Lord Franklin Fowler asked eagerly. Muster your strengths, my lords, as I gather our fleet to our shores. While the stags and lions burn the lands in their war, we shall deliver the killing blow at the lion's lair. Dorne calmly said. Lannisport, Lord Anders breathed out with wide eyes. You mean to strike at Lannisport? I mean to strike at the Lannister, where it'll hurt them the most, said Dorne. That's a bold tactic, my prince, Lord Franklin observed. Fortune favors the bold, or so I'm told. Dorne commented. You'll have our full support, my prince. Princess Elio was dear to many of us. She'll be avenged, Lady Delone said fiercely, her onyx eyes firm and shining with resolve. A sudden commotion in his feast hall made Dorne look up. His eyes immediately searched for his daughter, as Arianne was usually the culprit for most of the troubles in Sunspear. To his surprise, he found her in the company of one Sir Daemon Sand dancing on the floor, far removed from any trouble. Then his eyes fell on his brother, briefly widening Doran's eyes. "What's he doing here? He is supposed to be in Tyresh," Doran thought. He watched his younger brother wade through the merry guests, greeting old friends and acquaintances. Illyria Sand joined at his brother's hip until she met her father, Lord Harmon Uller, among the guests. Oberyn alone came towards him, leaving Illyria with her father. Doran merely raised an eyebrow questioningly when his brother just smiled at him in greeting. "My lords, my lady, I'm afraid I'll have to steal my brother away for a few moments. It was a long journey from Essos, and I'm afraid we siblings have quite some stories to share," said Oberyn, an easy smile on his face. After greeting and engaging in small talk with Lords Fowler, Euronwood, and Lady Allarian, Oberyn took charge of his wheelchair and moved Doran out of the ballroom. "Tell me, brother, why have you abandoned your post in Tyresh? I thought you were preparing to buy passage into the free city of Mare," Doran asked once they were safely inside his solar, away from prying eyes. "While I was in Tyresh, I was approached by a child carrying a message from the Master of Whispers of Robert Baratheon," said Oberyn. "Varys," Doran said, sitting up straight in his wheelchair, now far more interested as he realized Oberyn was not visiting Sunspear on a whim. "What did he have to say?" "He gave me a location of a small house on the city's outskirts and asked me to meet a man who goes by the name of Griff and his son, the young Griff." Doran was now flummoxed, as he had never heard of this Griff or young Griff. For a moment he wondered whether Robert Baratheon's Master of Whispers went mad after years of serving the Mad King and the chaos unfolding in the capital. From all the news that had filtered into Dorne, King's Landing was now a cursed city, and everyone was fleeing it like their lives depended on it. "What did you find, brother?" Doran asked. "The future, brother. Our sister didn't depart this world without leaving something behind. Her legacy endures," Oberyn said softly, walking back and opening the door of his solar and whispering something to the guards stationed outside. "I don't understand, Oberyn. What you talking about?" Doran asked, frowning at his younger sibling. "I believe we might have to reevaluate our plans with Viserys Targaryen," said Oberyn. Doran could only stare at his brother in utter bewilderment. His brother was the only person who knew and supported the plan he built around Viserys Targaryen as the centerpiece. If Oberyn believed the plan had to be rethought, he was left with nothing to confront the Baratheon dynasty, while the Lannister blood in the Baratheon dynasty was all but cut off. Thanks to recent events, he was not going to suspend the plan to unseat Robert Baratheon from the Iron Throne. The man still stepped over the bloodied corpses of his dear sister and her children. He'd never forgive the usurper for spitting on his sister and her children, and then went about marrying Tywin's daughter. So long as he lived, he'd never allow a Baratheon to hold on to the Iron Throne. "You don't need to look worried, brother. I'm not suggesting that we should accept Robert Baratheon's reign." "Then what are you saying, brother?" Doran asked. "I'm saying Arianne necessarily does not need to become queen to place Martell blood on the Iron Throne." Doran was confused, but didn't get to question his brother further, as someone knocked on the door. He watched confusedly, as Oberyn opened the door and invited a strange man with blue hair, a blue beard, and a child of Valyrian descent into his solar. "Oberyn, is this one of your secret paramours from Essos?" Doran asked with some healthy amount of dread. Even if Doran was tolerant of many sexual deviancies, the nobles of Dorne tended to have a poor outlook on their princes taking foreign lovers into Sunspear. He had known it firsthand with his wife, but at least Malario was his lawful wedded wife. This colorful man was unacceptable in Dorne, even if his brother was well known for his tastes. "No, brother," said Oberyn, laughing heartily while the blue-haired man looked repulsed. Doran calmed a little bit upon seeing this. "Then who's this?" asked Doran, looking at the strange man and the silver-haired child near the man who looked more confused than anyone in the room. "I'd not fault you for not recognizing me, Prince Doran. Often, I myself find it hard to accept that I'm the same man who became the Hand of the King." Doran eyed the man more closely, and that was when he saw the similarity, but could not twist his mind around the fact. "John Connington, but how? You were dead." "A ruse concocted by the spider to keep the usurper's attention away, so that I may raise Rhaegar's son safely in the free cities," said the former lord of Griffin's Roost. "Rhaegar's son?" Doran froze. looking at both men inquisitively. Yes, brother, as I said, Aelia's legacy endures. She endures through her son, said Oberyn, moving to the side and pushing the silver-haired boy close to his desk, and thereby Doran getting a good look at the boy. It was as if he was looking at young Rigerka, except for the eyes. The boy's eyes looked more blue than purple, but that could have been the light in the room playing tricks. "This is our nephew?" he asked in disbelief, staring at his brother to see whether it was a jest. But Oberyn just smiled at him and nodded. "Aegon," he whispered, reaching out with trembling hands and touching the young lad's cheek. The young boy just grinned, and for a moment he was taken aback by his childhood and saw his smiling sister in the boy's place. But the memory was fleeting, and it passed just as it came. A stray tear fell from his eyes as he had nearly forgotten his sister's smile. "Elias' son is alive," he whispered confusedly, overcome with emotions he couldn't quickly grasp or control. "Yes, Prince Doran. Young Aegon was smuggled away from King's Landing by Varys, who switched young Aegon with a tanner's son. Tywin's brute never realized the switch and smashed the babe's head on his master's orders. Lord Varys kept young Aegon safe with a friend of his and later entrusted him to me so that young Aegon receives proper training to reclaim his birthright." "Elias' son is alive?" Doran breathed out, hardly believing this miracle. "Aye, he is. And with him, the Targaryen dynasty lives on. Long live Argon, the sixth of his name, the king of Andals, the Rhoynar, and the first men," John Connington proclaimed. Doran looked at his brother, and Oberyn nodded at him. Their plans had to be changed. Arianne need not marry Viserys with Aegon alive and ready to reclaim the Iron Throne. But first, he had to be sure the boy was Aelia's son, not a mummer's farce concocted by the Spider and Connington to trick Dorne into fighting the usurper. And for that, he needed to know what happened during the sack of King's Landing. He looked at his brother again, and an idea slowly formed in his mind. Jon Arryn could only let out a frustrated groan as he set aside the message he received from Riverrun. Hoster Tully was again playing them all and keeping the Riverlands in an advantageous position. The man wanted something from the crown, and the elder Tully knew this was the best time to get what he wanted. This time around, he was not going to accommodate the whims of Hoster Tully's ego. Robert was now the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. If the Tullys refused to answer the call of their king, then they'll be dealt with just like any traitorous house, depending on the nature of their involvement in this war. Besides, he did not need Hoster Tully to rally the Riverlands to Robert's side. His eyes strayed to the two other parchments on his table. One was from his trusted Valemen, and the other was from the loyal Northmen. The Knights of the Vale had crossed the Bloody Gate and crossed into the Riverlands. At best, it would be a day or two before they reached the crossroads inn. The Northern Army, on the other hand, was still crossing into the Riverlands through the Neck. A good portion of their host had already crossed over, thanks to Ned's foresight to expand the King's Road that stretches north of the Neck last year. The Neck, on the other hand, remains a difficult terrain for supply carts to traverse, and therefore he could understand the time it was taking for the northern host to cross over into the Riverlands proper. But Ned had already reached out to him, saying that he had sent a force of 5,000 men ahead, under Lord Ricewell's command, into the Riverlands to gather the Riverlords in Robert's name. John was sure that Houses Blackwood, Bracken, Piper, Vance, and Mooton had pledged support when he reached out to them. He was quite surprised to learn that Bracken and Blackwood were on the same side in this situation, which would have amused him if the situation wasn't this precarious. The fact that Tywin chose to invade the Reach and break out in open rebellion against the Iron Throne would diminish the throne's power in the coming days. Even if Robert wins the war, the Seven Kingdoms will have an enormous power imbalance. Without Tywin's backing, the stability of the Baratheon dynasty would be in jeopardy, directly leading to more rebellions and challenges to the Iron Throne's power. He was not ignorant of the threats hiding in plain sight. The complete silence from Doran bothered him more than the grumblings the Master of Whispers brought to him from the Crownland Lords. It was one of the primary reasons he didn't dismiss Stannis' idea of leading the Crownland Lords against the Lannister army. Rather than let the Crownland Lords sit back and plot, he felt it was better if their energies were better spent against the Lannisters. Perhaps there was room for some minor lordships and land grants in the Westerlands once the rebelling Lannisters were put down for good. He was prepared to buy it out for stability if loyalty could not be enforced through oaths and honor. If the price of having no conflict was some land grants, few knighthoods, and lordships, then he was all too willing to pay that price. Shaking his head, Jon leaned back and sighed. So, in some ways, he was grateful Robert's hammer revealed the crimes of Cersei this early. If Tywin's daughter had managed to pull the wool over their eyes for many years to come, then who knows what could have happened. Jon was more than aware that he was getting old day after day. He was not long for this world. Should he perish, he knew Edard would be the most likely candidate to replace him. He doubted Robert would name Stannis as Hand of the King, even though the younger Baratheon was more than ready to shoulder the responsibilities the office demands. Should Edard accept, then the Iron Throne would no doubt become far more powerful, with the strength of House Stark binding the Baratheon dynasty to the Iron Throne. He sat up straight at the thought. A Stark and a Baratheon union would quell all thoughts of rebellion, as the Iron Throne would gain a powerful ally. But Edard is already a trusted friend and an ally to Robert. The realm needs to see the binding of the friendship through blood, Jon muttered. The only problem was that Robert lacked any male heirs for any marriage to bind the two houses through blood. However, the idea still had its merits. It's not as if Robert could not marry and have heirs in the future. There was also the possibility that Renly could marry Sansa Stark in a few years after Eddard's daughter reached a marriable age. The thoughts of marriage inevitably led Jon to the troublesome prospect of finding a queen for Robert. The sad fact was that he couldn't find anyone with the same prospects as Cersei Lannister offered to the fledgling Baratheon dynasty. With Cersei came the entire Westerlands, the gold and the power of House Lannister. There was no other woman that could offer Robert so much. The only possible match that could come close right now would be Arianne Martell. But a Dornish queen would also bring many problems with her. Not to mention, it was most likely impossible to forge such a union. He doubted Prince Doran and Oberyn Martell would accept the match, and if they did, he'd be extremely suspicious. A sudden knock on the door brought him out of his musings. "My lord, Lord Varys is here to see you," Hugh, his trusted squire, said, putting his head inside the room. "Send him through, Hugh," Jon said, placing a book over the many parchments he received from Maester Olivar, who took charge of the ravens with Pycelle languishing in the black cells. "My Lord Hand, I bring songs from Old Oak," said Varys, making Jon sit up straight in interest. "Is it favorable?" he asked eagerly. "It's my Lord Oakart repelled the Lannister army each time they tried to breach his walls. Then the king arrived at the helm of the royal army and smashed the Lannister army, sieging Old Oak Taggart. Lannister met his end at the end of his grace's hammer, and so did Sir Gregor Clegane," Varys reported diligently. Jon let out a relieved sigh at the news. It was as if a weight was lifted off his shoulders. "Very good. This is excellent news, Lord Varys," Jon said with palpable relief. "Of course, my lord. Perhaps it might be to our advantage that we spread the word of Sir Gregor's demise at the hands of his grace," Varys suggested, smiling thinly. "Dorne might start to engage with us more openly after the recent events." Jon nodded thoughtfully, thinking of another letter he would draft and send to Sunspear after this meeting. Like the Crownlanders, he hoped the ire of Dorne could be redirected at the Lannisters and hopefully reconcile the bad blood between the southernmost kingdom and the Baratheon dynasty. He held no notions that Dorne would ever be a friend of the Baratheon dynasty right away, but he hoped this was the beginning of that journey. A Baratheon princess marrying into House Martell could be a more stable rapprochement in the future. The door to his office chambers opened again. This time it was Maester Olivar. "Lord Hand, a raven came from Sunspear," said the young Maester, who was 20 names days junior of Pycelle. He immediately broke House Martell's seal and read the message's contents. It seemed Prince Doran is sending his younger brother as an emissary of Dorne to King's Landing. Jon said aloud, setting aside the parchment on his table. The frown on the faces of the two men standing in his office spoke volumes of what they thought of the matter. "That seems odd," Varys slowly said. "Perhaps Prince Doran is hoping to glean the particulars of the war aims of his grace." "Perhaps," Jon trailed off, but didn't share his thoughts on the matter. "Shall I make the arrangements for Prince Oberyn's arrival, Lord Hand?" asked Maester Olivar. "Please do," Jon said, dismissing the young Maester. Once the door closed and left Jon alone with the Master of Whispers, his face became grave. "This is not good. Prince Oberyn is not known for his level-headedness in the Seven Kingdoms. He'll be looking to exact vengeance on House Lannister and anyone who had a part in his sister's murder. said Jon, looking a bit green at the very thought. I could convey what happened and blame it all on Sir Marie Lorch and Sir Gregor Clegane, Varys offered. No, it's obvious that the Martells hold Lord Tywin responsible. I'd have you speak the truth, but take care not to antagonize the prince, my lord. Greater men have fallen prey to the bite of the Red Viper. Jon warned. Perhaps the Red Viper would make an exception and spare the messenger. Varys tittered, hiding his face behind a long sleeve. Harry threw a piece of meat high in the air, and it was snatched right off before it could hit the ground by Fenris. The Black Wolf let out a low growl that made the guards in the training yard jump as his trusted companion noisily gorged himself on the tasty flesh of a wild bull. He watched Fenris finish the meat in a few seconds and eye him most eagerly, with his tail wagging impatiently. I suppose you've earned the full bucket, you big bad wolf. Harry petted his familiar by rubbing Fenris's head before presenting the bucket full of meat. Fenris let out a pleased howl before eagerly putting his head into the bucket and enjoying the rare meat to his heart's content. Harry chuckled, seeing the happiness of his wolf. His eyes went to the small burned patch of fur on Fenris' shoulder, where the fire dragon snorted out a stream of fire. For some reason, the fire dragon had taken up a liking to Fenris, even if the dragon refused to let Harry anywhere near him. He supposed the fire dragon liked to sleep on Fenris's back because of the warm fur, or it was because the fire dragon was a big softy and wanted to cuddle into the natural warmth provided by Fenris. For this reason, he had taken to calling the fire dragon Cuddles. By the angry looks and the many attempts to turn him into a burned crisp, Harry knew the fire dragon did not like that name. But that was not going to stop him from calling the dragon Cuddles. Despite that, he was happy Cuddles managed to form a friendship of sorts with Fenris. Though how long that'd last was a curious case. Cuddles would only grow bigger, and the fire dragon was already as big as a cat. Now the ice dragon, on the other hand, was far more accepting of his attempts to befriend it. To his surprise, the ice dragon even responded cordially so far to the name he assigned, Winter. Harry, are you going to join me anytime soon? Jon shouted at him from the archery range. This kid, he got nothing but training in his mind. Harry shook his head at the thought.
I'm coming,
he shouted back. He pushed a sliver of magical energy into his power ring, and his hands were squeaky clean. He was about to pick up a bow when Maester Luwin entered the training yard. Harrion. A company of men and women approaches Hunter's Gate. They fly the banners of the Black Bear, said Maester Luwin. House Mormont, Harry frowned. Why are they here? Possibly for a petition to suspend Lord Eddard's verdict regarding the reparation owed to the families of the victims affected by Ser Jorah's actions. Maester Luwin mused aloud. That'd be highly irregular, isn't that so, Maester? Harry asked. I'm afraid so. Harry looked thoughtfully off into the distance. If he got the gist of the situation right, House Mormont was ordered to pay a significant sum of reparations to the survivors, his men fished out from the sea, and the families of the victims who were unfortunately not with them in the Bear Islands. Ser Jorah's actions had seen to it that either those poachers and thieves were sold off in Essos as slaves, or they jumped ships and died in the sea. He'd have attained the lands and the castle of House Mormont for sheer incompetence if it were up to him. Instead, his father had shown mercy and allowed Ser Jorah's aunt and her daughters to inherit Mormont Keep. Lady Mage Mormont now ruled the Bear Islands, and by Maester Luwin's and his mother's word, the woman was of a right sort, but that doesn't excuse her ignorance of a crime of this scale. Allow them entry. I'll hear him out, Harry eventually said. He hoped Lady Mage Mormont was not about to waste his time.